The Confessions of Saint Augustine. Book 1. Great art, thou, O Lord, and greatly to be praised. Great is thy power, and thy wisdom infinite. And thee would man praise, man, but a particle of thy creation. Man, that bears about him his mortality, the witness of his sin, the witness that thou resistest the proud. Yet would man praise thee, he but a particle of thy creation. Thou awakest us to delight in thy praise, for thou madest us for thyself, and our heart is restless until it repose in thee. Grant me, Lord, to know and understand which is first, to call on thee or to praise thee. And again, to know thee or to call on thee. For who can call on thee, not knowing thee? For he that knoweth thee not may call on thee as other than thou art. Or is it rather that we call on thee that we may know thee? But how shall they call on him in whom they have not believed? Or how shall they believe without a preacher? And they that seek the Lord shall praise him, for they that seek shall find him, and they that find shall praise him. I will seek thee, Lord, by calling on thee, and will call on thee, believing in thee, for to us hast thou been preached. My faith, Lord, shall call on thee, which thou hast given me, wherewith thou hast inspired me, through the incarnation of thy Son, through the ministry of the preacher. And how shall I call upon my God and Lord, since when I call for him, I shall be calling him to myself? And what room is there within me, whither my God can come into me? Whither can God come into me, God who made heaven and earth? Is there indeed, O Lord my God, aught in me that can contain thee? Do then heaven and earth, which thou hast made, and wherein thou hast made me, contain thee? Or, because nothing which exists could exist without thee, doth therefore whatever exists contain thee? Since then I too exist, why do I seek that thou shouldest enter into me, who were not, wert thou not in me? Why? Because I am not gone down in hell, and yet thou art there also. For if I go down into hell, thou art there. I could not be then, O my God, could not be at all, wert thou not in me. Or, rather, unless I were in thee, of whom are all things, by whom are all things, in whom are all things. Even so, Lord, even so. Whither do I call thee, since I am in thee? Or whence canst thou enter into me? For whither can I go beyond heaven and earth, that thence my God should come into me, who hath said, I fill the heaven and the earth? Do the heaven and earth then contain thee, since thou fillest them? Or dost thou fill them and yet overflow, since they do not contain thee? And whither, when the heaven and the earth are filled, pourest thou forth the remainder of thyself? Or hast thou no need that aught contain thee, who containest all things, since what thou fillest by containing it? For the vessels which thou fillest uphold thee not, since though they were broken, thou wert not poured out. And when thou art poured out on us, thou art not cast down, but thou upliftest us. Thou art not dissipated, but thou gatherest us. But thou who fillest all things, fillest thou them with thy whole self? Or, since all things cannot contain thee wholly, do they contain part of thee, and all at once the same part? Or each its own part, the greater more, the smaller less? And is then one part of thee greater, another less? Or art thou wholly everywhere, while nothing contains thee wholly? What art thou then, my God? What but the Lord God? For who is Lord but the Lord? Or who is God save our God? Most highest, most good, most potent, most omnipotent, most merciful, yet most just, most hidden, yet most present, most beautiful, yet most strong, stable, yet incomprehensible, unchangeable, yet all-changing, never new, never old, all renewing, and bringing age upon the proud, and they know it not, ever working, ever at rest, still gathering, yet nothing lacking, supporting, filling and overspreading, creating, nourishing and maturing, seeking, yet having all things. Thou lovest without passion, art jealous without anxiety, repentest, yet grievest not, art angry, yet serene, changest thy works, thy purpose unchanged, receivest again what thou findest, yet didst never lose, never in need, yet rejoicing in gains, never covetous, yet exacting usury. Thou receivest over and above that thou mayest owe, and who hath aught that is not thine? Thou payest debts, owing nothing, remittest debts, losing nothing. And what had I now said, my God, my life, my holy joy? Or what saith any man when he speaks of thee? Yet woe to him that speaketh not, since mute are even the most eloquent. Oh, that I might repose on thee! Oh, that thou wouldest enter into my heart and inebriate it, that I may forget my ills and embrace thee, my sole good. What art thou to me? In thy pity, teach me to utter it. Or what am I to thee that thou demandest my love? And if I give it not, art wroth with me, and threatenest me with grievous woes. Is it then a slight woe to love thee not? O, for thy mercy's sake, tell me, O Lord my God, what thou art unto me. Say unto my soul, I am thy salvation. So speak, that I may hear. Behold, Lord, my heart is before thee. Open thou the ears thereof, and say unto my soul, I am thy salvation. After this voice let me haste, and take hold on thee. Hide not thy face from me. Let me die, lest I die. Only let me see thy face. Narrow is the mansion of my soul. Enlarge thou it, that thou mayest enter in. It is ruinous. Repair thou it. It has that within which must offend thine eyes. I confess and know it. But who shall cleanse it? Or to whom should I cry, save thee? Lord, cleanse me from my secret faults, and spare thy servant from the power of the enemy. I believe, and therefore do I speak. Lord, thou knowest. Have I not confessed against myself my transgressions unto thee, and thou, my God, hast forgiven the iniquity of my heart? I contend not in judgment with thee, who art the truth. I fear to deceive myself, lest mine iniquity lie unto itself. Therefore I contend not in judgment with thee. For if thou, Lord, shouldest mark iniquities, O Lord, who shall abide it? Yet suffer me to speak unto thy mercy, me, dust and ashes. Yet suffer me to speak, since I speak to thy mercy, and not to scornful man. Thou too, perhaps, despisest me, yet wilt thou return and have compassion upon me. For what would I say, O Lord my God, but that I know not whence I came into this dying life, shall I call it, or living death? Then immediately did the comforts of thy compassion take me up, as I heard, for I remember it not, from the parents of my flesh, out of whose substance thou didst sometime fashion me. Thus there received me the comforts of woman's milk, for neither my mother nor my nurses stored their own breasts for me, but thou didst bestow the food of my infancy through them, according to thine ordinance, whereby thou distributest thy riches through the hidden springs of all things. Thou also gavest me to desire no more than thou gavest, and to my nurses willingly to give me what thou gavest them. For they, with a heaven-taught affection, willingly gave me what they abounded with from thee. For this, my good from them, was good for them. Nor, indeed, from them was it, but through them. For from thee, O God, are all good things, and from my God is all my health. This I since learned, thou, through these thy gifts, within me and without, proclaiming thyself unto me. For then I knew but to suck, to repose in what pleased, and cry at what offended my flesh. Nothing more. Afterwards I began to smile, first in sleep, then waking, for so it was told me of myself, and I believed it, for we see the like in other infants, though of myself I remember it not. Thus, little by little, I became conscious where I was, and to have a wish to express my wishes to those who could content them, and I could not, for the wishes were within me, and they without, nor could they by any sense of theirs enter within my spirit. So I flung about at random limbs and voice, making the few signs I could, and such as I could, like, though in truth very little like, what I wished. And when I was not presently obeyed, my wishes being hurtful or unintelligible, then I was indignant with my elders for not submitting to me, with those owing me no service for not serving me, and avenged myself on them by tears. Such have I learnt infants to be from observing them, and that I was myself such, they, all unconscious, have shown me better than my nurses who knew it. And lo, my infancy died long since, and I live. But thou, Lord, who for ever livest, and in whom nothing dies, for before the foundation of the worlds, and before all that can be called before, thou art, and art God, and Lord of all which thou hast created. In thee abide, fixed forever, the first causes of all things unabiding, and of all things changeable, the springs abide in thee unchangeable, and in thee live the eternal reasons of all things unreasoning and temporal. Say, Lord, to me, thy suppliant. Say, all-pitying, to me, thy pitiable one. Say, did my infancy succeed another age of mine that died before it? Was it that which I spent within my mother's womb? For of that I have heard somewhat, and have myself seen women with child. And what before that life again, O God my joy, was I anywhere or anybody? For this have I none to tell me, neither father nor mother, nor experience of others, nor mine own memory. Dost thou mock me for asking this, and bid me praise thee and acknowledge thee, for that I do know? I acknowledge thee, Lord of heaven and earth, and praise thee for my first rudiments of being, and my infancy, whereof I remember nothing. For thou hast appointed that man should from others guess much as to himself, and believe much on the strength of weak females. Even then I had being and life, and, at my infancy's close, I could seek for signs whereby to make known to others my sensations. Whence could such a being be, save from thee, Lord? Shall any be his own artificer? Or can there elsewhere be derived any vein which may stream essence and life into us, save from thee, O Lord, in whom essence and life are one? For thou thyself art supremely essence and life, for thou art most high, and art not changed, neither in thee doth today come to a close, yet in thee doth it come to a close, because all such things also are in thee, for they had no way to pass away, unless thou upheldest them. And since thy years fail not, thy years are one today. How many of ours and our fathers' years have flowed away through thy today, and from it received the measure and the mould of such being as they had, and still others shall flow away, and so receive the mould of their degree of being. But thou art still the same, and all things of tomorrow, and all beyond, and all of yesterday, and all behind it, thou hast done today. What is it to me, though any comprehend not this? Let him also rejoice and say, what thing is this? Let him rejoice even thus, and be content rather by not discovering to discover thee, than by discovering not to discover thee. Hear, O God. Alas for man's sin! So saith man, and thou pitiest him. For thou madest him, but sin in him thou madest not. Who remindeth me of the sins of my infancy? For in thy sight none is pure from sin, not even the infant whose life is but a day upon the earth. Who remindeth me? Doth not each little infant, in whom I see what of myself I remember not? What then was my sin? Was it that I hung upon the breast and cried? For should I now so do for food suitable to my age, justly should I be laughed at and reproved. What I then did was worthy reproof, but since I could not understand reproof, custom and reason forbade me to be reproved. For those habits, when grown, we root out and cast away. Now no man, though he prunes, wittingly casts away what is good. Or was it then good, even for a while, to cry for what, if given, would hurt? Bitterly to resent that persons free, and its own elders, yea, the very authors of its birth, served it not. That many besides, wiser than it, obeyed not the nod of its good pleasure. To do its best to strike and hurt, because commands were not obeyed, which had been obeyed to its hurt. The weakness then of infant limbs, not its will, is its innocence. Myself have seen and known even a baby envious. It could not speak, yet it turned pale and looked bitterly on its foster brother. Who knows not this? Mothers and nurses tell you that they allay these things by I know not what remedies. Is that too innocence, when the fountain of milk is flowing in rich abundance, not to endure one to share it, though in extremest need, and whose very life as yet depends thereon? We bear gently with all this, not as being no or slight evils, but because they will disappear as years increase. For though tolerated now, the very same tempers are utterly intolerable when found in riper years. Thou then, O Lord my God, who gavest life to this my infancy, furnishing thus with senses, as we see, the frame thou gavest, compacting its limbs, ornamenting its proportions, and, for its general good and safety, implanting in it all vital functions. Thou commandest me to praise thee in these things, to confess unto thee, and sing unto thy name, thou most highest. For thou art God, almighty and good, even hadst thou done naught but only this, which none could do but thou, whose unity is the mould of all things, who out of thy own fairness makest all things fair, and orderest all things by thy law. This age then, Lord, whereof I have no remembrance, which I take on others' word, and guess from other infants that I have passed, true though the guess be, I am yet loth to count in this life of mine which I live in this world. For no less than that which I spent in my mother's womb is it hid from me in the shadows of forgetfulness. But if I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me, where, I beseech thee, O my God, where, Lord, or when, was I thy servant guiltless? But lo, that period I pass by, and what have I now to do with that, of which I can recall no vestige? Passing hence from infancy, I came to boyhood, or rather it came to me, displacing infancy. Nor did that depart, for whither went it? And yet it was no more, for I was no longer a speechless infant, but a speaking boy. This I remember, and have since observed how I learned to speak. It was not that my elders taught me words, as, soon after, other learning, in any set method, but I, longing by cries and broken accents and various motions of my limbs to express my thoughts, that so I might have my will, and yet unable to express all I willed, or to whom I willed, did myself, by the understanding which thou, my God, gavest me, practice the sounds in my memory. When they named anything, and as they spoke turned towards it, I saw and remembered that they called what they would point out by the name they uttered, and that they meant this thing, and no other was plain from the motion of their body, the natural language, as it were, of all nations, expressed by the countenance, glances of the eye, gestures of the limbs, and tones of the voice, indicating the affections of the mind as it pursues, possesses, rejects, or shuns. And thus by constantly hearing words, as they occurred in various sentences, I collected gradually for what they stood, and having broken in my mouth to these signs, I thereby gave utterance to my will. Thus I exchanged with those about me these current signs of our wills, and so launched deeper into the stormy intercourse of human life, yet depending on parental authority and the beck of elders. O God, my God, what miseries and mockeries did I now experience, when obedience to my teachers was proposed to me, as proper in a boy, in order that in this world I might prosper and excel in tongue science, which should serve to the praise of men, and to deceitful riches. Next I was put to school to get learning, in which I, poor wretch, knew not what use there was, and yet, if idle in learning, I was beaten. For this was judged right by our forefathers, and many, passing the same course before us, framed for us weary paths, through which we were fain to pass, multiplying toil and grief upon the sons of Adam. But, Lord, we found that men called upon thee, and we learnt from them to think of thee, according to our powers, as of some great one, who, though hidden from our senses, couldest hear and help us. For so I began, as a boy, to pray to thee, my aid and refuge, and broke the fetters of my tongue to call on thee, praying thee, though small, yet with no small earnestness, that I might not be beaten at school. And when thou heardest me not thereby giving me over to folly, my elders, yea, my very parents, who yet wished me no ill, mocked my stripes, my then great and grievous ill. Is there, Lord, any of soul so great, and cleaving to thee with so intense affection, for a sort of stupidity will in a way do it? But is there any one who, from cleaving devoutly to thee, is endued with so great a spirit that he can think as lightly of the racks and hooks and other torments, against which, throughout all lands, men call on thee with extreme dread, mocking at those by whom they are feared most bitterly, as our parents mocked the torments which we suffered in boyhood from our masters? For we feared not our torments less, nor prayed we less to thee to escape them, and yet we sinned, in writing or reading or studying less than was exacted of us. For we wanted not, O Lord, memory or capacity, whereof thy will gave enough for our age, but our sole delight was play, and for this we were punished by those who yet themselves were doing the like. But elder folks' idleness is called business. That of boys, being really the same, is punished by those elders, and none commiserates either boys or men. For will any of sound discretion approve of my being beaten as a boy, because by playing a ball I made less progress in studies which I was to learn, only that, as a man, I might play more unbeseemingly? And what else did he who beat me? Who, if worsted in some trifling discussion with his fellow tutor, was more embittered and jealous than I when beaten at ball by a playfellow? And yet I sinned herein. O Lord God, the Creator and Disposer of all things in nature, of sin the Disposer only, O Lord my God, I sinned in transgressing the commands of my parents and those of my masters. For what they, with whatever motive, would have me learn, I might afterwards have put to good use. For I disobeyed, not from a better choice, but from love of play, loving the pride of victory in my contests, and to have my ears tickled with lying fables, that they might itch the more, the same curiosity flashing from my eyes more and more for the shows and games of my elders. Yet those who give these shows are in such esteem that almost all wish the same for their children, and yet are very willing that they should be beaten, if those very games detain them from the studies, whereby they would have them attain to be the givers of them. Look with pity, Lord, on these things, and deliver us who call upon thee now. Deliver those too who call not on thee yet, that they may call on thee, and thou mayest deliver them. As a boy, then, I had already heard of an eternal life, promised us through the humility of the Lord our God stooping to our pride, and even from the womb of my mother, who greatly hoped in thee, I was sealed with the mark of his cross, and salted with his salt. Thou sawest, Lord, how while yet a boy, being seized on a time with sudden oppression of the stomach, and like near to death, thou sawest, my God, for thou wert my keeper, with what eagerness and what faith I sought, from the pious care of my mother, and thy church, the mother of us all, the baptism of thy Christ, my God and Lord. Whereupon the mother of my flesh, being much troubled, since with a heart pure in thy faith, she even more lovingly travailed in birth of my salvation, would in eager haste have provided for my consecration and cleansing by the health-giving sacraments, confessing thee, Lord Jesus, for the remission of sins, unless I had suddenly recovered. And so, as if I must needs be again polluted should I live, my cleansing was deferred, because the defilements of sin would, after that washing, bring greater and more perilous guilt. I then already believed, and my mother, and the whole household, except my father, yet did not he prevail over the power of my mother's piety in me, that as he did not yet believe, so neither should I. For it was her earnest care that thou, my God, rather than he, shouldest be my father. And in this thou didst aid her to prevail over her husband, whom she, the better, obeyed, therein also obeying thee, who hast so commanded. I beseech thee, my God, I would fain know, if so thou willest, for what purpose my baptism was then deferred. Was it for my good that the rein was laid loose, as it were, upon me, for me to sin? Or was it not laid loose? If not, why does it still echo in our ears on all sides? Let him alone, let him do as he will, for he is not yet baptized. But as to bodily health, no one says, let him be worse wounded, for he is not yet healed. How much better, then, had I been at once healed, and then, by my friends and my own, my soul's recovered health had been kept safe in thy keeping who gavest it. Better, truly. But how many and great waves of temptation seemed to hang over me after my boyhood. These my mother foresaw, and preferred to expose to them the clay whence I might afterwards be moulded, than the very cast when made. In boyhood itself, however, so much less dreaded for me than youth, I loved not study, and hated to be forced to it. Yet I was forced, and this was well done towards me, but I did not well, for unless forced, I had not learnt. But no one doth well against his will, even though what he doth be well. Yet neither did they well who forced me, but what was well came to me from thee, my God. For they were regardless how I should employ what they forced me to learn, except to satiate the insatiate desires of a wealthy beggary and a shameful glory. But thou, by whom the very hairs of our head are numbered, didst use for my good the error of all who urged me to learn, and my own, who would not learn, thou didst use for my punishment, a fit penalty for one, so small a boy and so great a sinner. So by those who did not well, thou didst well for me, and by my own sin thou didst justly punish me. For thou hast commanded, and so it is, that every inordinate affection should be its own punishment. But why did I so much hate the Greek, which I studied as a boy? I do not yet fully know. For the Latin I loved, not what my first masters, but what the so-called grammarians taught me. For those first lessons, reading, writing, and arithmetic, I thought as great a burden and penalty as any Greek. And yet, whence was this too, but from the sin and vanity of this life, because I was flesh, and a breath that passeth away and cometh not again? For those first lessons were better certainly, because more certain. By them I obtained, and still retain, the power of reading what I find written, and myself writing what I will. Whereas in the others I was forced to learn the wanderings of one Ennius, forgetful of my own, and to weep for dead Dido, because she killed herself for love. The while, with dry eyes, I endured my miserable self dying among these things, far from thee, O God, my life. For what more miserable than a miserable being who commiserates not himself, weeping the death of Dido for love to Ennius, but weeping not his own death for want of love to thee, O God? Thou light of my heart, thou bread of my inmost soul, thou power who givest vigour to my mind, who quickenest my thoughts, I loved thee not. I committed fornication against thee, and all around me thus fornicating there echoed, Well done, well done. For the friendship of this world is fornication against thee, and well done, well done. Echoes on till one is ashamed not to be thus a man. And for all this I wept not, I who wept for Dido slain, and seeking by the sword a stroke and wound extreme, myself seeking the while a worse extreme, the extremest and lowest of thy creatures, having forsaken thee, earth passing into the earth. And if forbid to read all this, I was grieved that I might not read what grieved me. Madness like this is thought a higher and a richer learning than that by which I learned to read and write. But now, my God, cry thou aloud in my soul, and let thy truth tell me, not so, not so. Far better was that first study. For lo, I would readily forget the wanderings of Ennius and all the rest, rather than how to read and write. But over the entrance of the grammar school is a veil drawn. True, yet is this not so much an emblem of aught recondite as a cloak of error? Let not those whom I no longer fear cry out against me, while I confess to thee, my God, whatever my soul will, and acquiesce in the condemnation of my evil ways, that I may love thy good ways. Let not either buyers or sellers of grammar learning cry out against me, for if I question them whether it be true that Ennius came on a time to Carthage, as the poet tells, the less learned will reply that they know not, the more learned that he never did. But should I ask with what letters the name Ennius is written, everyone who has learnt this will answer me aright as to the signs which men have conventionally settled. If, again, I should ask which might be forgotten with least detriment to the concerns of life, reading and writing, or these poetic fictions, who does not foresee what all must answer who have not wholly forgotten themselves? I sinned, then, when as a boy I preferred those empty to those more profitable studies, or rather loved the one and hated the other. 1 and 1, 2, 2 and 2, 4. This was to me a hateful sing-song. The wooden horse lined with armed men, and the burning of Troy, and Creusa's shade and sad similitude were the choice spectacle of my vanity. Why then did I hate the Greek classics, which have the like tales? For Homer also curiously wove the like fictions, and is most sweetly vain, yet was he bitter to my boyish taste. And so I suppose would Virgil be to Grecian children, when forced to learn him, as I was Homer. Difficulty, in truth, the difficulty of a foreign tongue, dashed, as it were, with gall all the sweetness of Grecian fable. For not one word of it did I understand, and to make me understand, I was urged vehemently with cruel threats and punishments. Time was also, as an infant, I knew no Latin. But this I learned without fear or suffering, by mere observation, amid the caresses of my nursery and jests of friends, smiling and sportively encouraging me. This I learned without any pressure of punishment to urge me on, for my heart urged me to give birth to its conceptions, which I could only do by learning words not of those who taught, but of those who talked with me, in whose ears also I gave birth to the thoughts, whatever I conceived. No doubt, then, that a free curiosity has more force in our learning these things than a frightful enforcement. Only this enforcement restrains the rovings of that freedom, through thy laws, O my God, thy laws, from the master's cane to the martyr's trials, being able to temper for us a wholesome bitter, recalling us to thyself from that deadly pleasure which lures us from thee. Hear, Lord, my prayer. Let not my soul faint under thy discipline, nor let me faint in confessing unto thee all thy mercies, whereby thou hast drawn me out of all my most evil ways, that thou mightest become a delight to me above all the allurements which I once pursued, that I may most entirely love thee, and clasp thy hand with all my affections, and thou mayest yet rescue me from every temptation, even unto the end. For lo, O Lord, my King and my God, for thy service be whatever useful thing my childhood learned, for thy service that I speak, write, read, reckon. For thou didst grant me thy discipline, while I was learning vanities, and my sin of delighting in those vanities thou hast forgiven. In them, indeed, I learnt many a useful word, but these may as well be learned in things not vain, and that is the safe path for the steps of youth. But woe is thee, thou torrent of human custom! Who shall stand against thee? How long shalt thou not be dried up? How long roll the sons of Eve into that huge and hideous ocean, which even they scarcely overpass who climb the cross? Did not I read in thee of Jove, the thunderer, and the adulterer? Both, doubtless, he could not be. But so the feigned thunder might countenance and pander to real adultery. And now, which of our gowned masters lends a sober ear to one who from their own school cries out, "These were Homer's fictions, transferring things human to the gods. Would he had brought down things divine to us?" Yet more truly had he said, "These are indeed his fictions, but attributing a divine nature to wicked men, that crimes might be no longer crimes, and whoso commits them might seem to imitate not abandoned men, but the celestial gods. And yet, thou hellish torrent, into thee are cast the sons of men with rich rewards for compassing such learning, and a great solemnity is made of it, when this is going on in the forum, within sight of laws appointing a salary beside the scholar's payments, and thou lashest thy rocks and roarest, hence words are learnt, hence eloquence, most necessary to gain your ends or maintain opinions. As if we should have never known such words as golden shower, lap, beguile, temples of the heavens, or others in that passage, unless Terence had brought a lewd youth upon the stage, setting up Jupiter as his example of seduction. Viewing a picture, where the tale was drawn, of Jove's descending in a golden shower, to Danae's lap a woman to beguile. And then mark how he excites himself to lust as by celestial authority. And what God? Great Jove, who shakes heaven's highest temples with his thunder. And I, poor mortal man, not do the same. I did it, and with all my heart I did it. Not one whit more easily are the words learnt for all this vileness, but by their means the vileness is committed with less shame. Not that I blame the words, being, as it were, choice and precious vessels, but that wine of error which is drunk to us in them by intoxicated teachers. And if we, too, drink not, we are beaten, and have no sober judge to whom we may appeal. Yet, O my God, in whose presence I now without hurt may remember this, all this unhappily I learnt willingly with great delight, and for this was pronounced a hopeful boy. Bear with me, my God, while I say somewhat of my wit, thy gift, and on what dotages I wasted it. For a task was set me, troublesome enough to my soul, upon terms of praise or shame, and fear of stripes, to speak the words of Juno, as she raged and mourned that she could not. This Trojan prince from Latinum turn, which words I had heard that Juno never uttered, but we were forced to go astray in the footsteps of these poetic fictions, and to say in prose much what he expressed in verse. And his speaking was most applauded, in whom the passions of rage and grief were most preeminent, and clothed in the most fitting language, maintaining the dignity of the character. What is it to me, O my true life, my God, that my declamation was applauded above so many of my own age and class? Is not all this smoke and wind? And was there nothing else whereon to exercise my wit and tongue? Thy praises, Lord, thy praises might have stayed the yet tender shoot of my heart by the prop of thy scriptures, so had it not trailed away amid these empty trifles, a defiled prey for the fowls of the air. For in more ways than one do men sacrifice to the rebellious angels. But what marvel that I was thus carried away to vanities, and went out from thy presence, O my God, when men were set before me as models, who, if in relating some action of theirs, in itself not ill, they committed some barbarism or solecism, being censured, were abashed. But when in rich and adorned and well-ordered discourse they related their own disordered life, being bepraised, they gloried. These things thou seest, Lord, and holdest thy peace, long-suffering and plenteous in mercy and truth. Wilt thou hold thy peace forever? And even now thou drawest out of this horrible gulf the soul that seeketh thee, that thirsteth for thy pleasures, whose heart saith unto thee, I have sought thy face. Thy face, Lord, will I seek. For darkened affections is removal from thee. For it is not by our feet or change of place that men leave thee or return unto thee. Or did that thy younger son look out for horses or chariots or ships, fly with visible wings, or journey by the motion of his limbs, that he might in a far country waste in riotous living all thou gavest at his departure? A loving father, when thou gavest, and more loving unto him, when he returned empty. So then in lustful, that is, in darkened affections, is the true distance from thy face. Behold, O Lord God, yea, behold patiently, as thou art wont, how carefully the sons of men observe the covenanted rules of letters and syllables received from those who spake before them, neglecting the eternal covenant of everlasting salvation received from thee. Insomuch that a teacher or learner of the hereditary laws of pronunciation will more offend men by speaking without the aspirate of a human being in despite of the laws of grammar than if he, a human being, hate a human being in despite of thine. As if any enemy could be more hurtful than the hatred with which he is incensed against him, or could wound more deeply him whom he persecutes than he wounds his own soul by his enmity. Assuredly, no science of letters can be so innate as the record of conscience, that he is doing to another what from another he would be loth to suffer. How deep are thy ways, O God, thou only great, that sittest silent on high, and by an unwearied law dispensing penal blindness to lawless desires. In quest of the fame of eloquence, a man standing before a human judge, surrounded by a human throng, declaiming against his enemy with fiercest hatred, will take heed most watchfully, lest, by an error of the tongue, he murder the word human being, but takes no heed, lest, through the fury of his spirit, he murder the real human being. This was the world at whose gate unhappy I lay in my boyhood. This the stage where I had feared more to commit a barbarism than, having committed one, to envy those who had not. These things I speak and confess to thee, my God, for which I had praise from them, whom I then thought it all virtue to please. For I saw not the abyss of vileness, wherein I was cast away from thine eyes. Before them, what more foul than I was already, displeasing even such as myself, with innumerable lies deceiving my tutor, my masters, my parents, from love of play, eagerness to see vain shows, and restlessness to imitate them. Thefts also I committed, from my parents' cellar and table, enslaved by greediness, or that I might have to give to boys who sold me their play, which all the while they liked no less than I. In this play, too, I often sought unfair conquests, conquered myself meanwhile by vain desire of preeminence. And what could I so ill endure, or, when I detected it, upbraided I so fiercely as that I was doing to others? And for which, if, detected, I was upbraided, I chose rather to quarrel than to yield. And is this the innocence of boyhood? Not so, Lord, not so. I cry thy mercy, my God. For these very sins, as riper years succeed, these very sins are transferred from tutors and masters, from nuts and balls and sparrows, to magistrates and kings, to gold and manors and slaves, just as severer punishments displace the cane. It was the low stature then of childhood, which thou, our King, didst commend as an emblem of lowliness, when thou saidst, of such is the kingdom of heaven. Yet, Lord, to thee, the Creator and Governor of the universe, most excellent and most good, thanks were due to thee, our God, even hadst thou destined for me boyhood only. For even then I lived, and felt, and had an implanted providence over my well-being, a trace of that mysterious unity whence I was derived. I guarded by the inward sense the entireness of my senses, and in these minute pursuits, and in my thoughts on things minute, I learnt to delight in truth. I hated to be deceived, had a vigorous memory, was gifted with speech, was soothed by friendship, avoided pain, baseness, ignorance. In so small a creature, what was not wonderful, not admirable? But all are gifts of my God. It was not I who gave them me. And good these are, and these together are myself. Good, then, is he that made me, and he is my good, and before him will I exult for every good which of a boy I had. For it was my sin, that not in him, but in his creatures, myself and others, I sought for pleasures, sublimities, truths, and so fell headlong into sorrows, confusions, errors. Thanks be to thee, my joy and my glory and my confidence, my God. Thanks be to thee for thy gifts, but do thou preserve them to me. For so wilt thou preserve me, and those things shall be enlarged and perfected which thou hast given me, and I myself shall be with thee, since even to be thou hast given me. Book 2. I will now call to mind my past foulness and the carnal corruptions of my soul, not because I love them, but that I may love thee, O my God. For love of thy love I do it, reviewing my most wicked ways in the very bitterness of my remembrance, that thou mayest grow sweet unto me, thou sweetness never failing, thou blissful and assured sweetness, and gathering me again out of that my dissipation, wherein I was torn piecemeal, while turned from thee, the one good, I lost myself among a multiplicity of things. For I even burnt in my youth heretofore to be satiated in things below, and I dared to grow wild again, with these various and shadowy loves, my beauty consumed away, and I stank in thine eyes, pleasing myself and desirous to please in the eyes of men. And what was it that I delighted in, but to love and be loved? But I kept not the measure of love, of mind to mind, friendship's bright boundary, but out of the muddy concupiscence of the flesh and the bubblings of youth, mists fumed up which beclouded and overcast my heart, that I could not discern the clear brightness of love from the fog of lustfulness. Both did confusedly boil in me, and hurried my unstayed youth over the precipice of unholy desires, and sunk me in a gulf of flagitiousnesses. Thy wrath had gathered over me, and I knew it not. I was grown deaf by the clanking of the chain of my mortality, the punishment of the pride of my soul, and I strayed further from thee, and thou lettest me alone, and I was tossed about, and wasted, and dissipated, and I boiled over in my fornications, and thou heldest thy peace, O thou my tardy joy. Thou then heldest thy peace, and I wandered further and further from thee, into more and more fruitless seed plots of sorrows, with a proud dejectedness and a restless weariness. Oh, that someone had then attempered my disorder, and turned to account the fleeting beauties of these, the extreme points of thy creation, had put a bound to their pleasurableness, that so the tides of my youth might have cast themselves upon the marriage shore, if they could not be calmed and kept within the object of a family, as thy law prescribes, O Lord, who this way formest the offspring of this our death, being able with a gentle hand to blunt the thorns which were excluded from thy paradise. For thy omnipotency is not far from us, even when we be far from thee. Else ought I more watchfully to have heeded the voice from the clouds. Nevertheless, such shall have trouble in the flesh, but I spare you. And it is good for a man not to touch a woman. And he that is unmarried thinketh of the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But he that is married careth for the things of this world, how he may please his wife. To these words I should have listened more attentively, and being severed for the kingdom of heaven's sake, had more happily awaited thy embraces. But I, poor wretch, foamed like a troubled sea, following the rushing of my own tide, forsaking thee, and exceeded all thy limits. Yet I escaped not thy scourges. For what mortal can? For thou wert ever with me mercifully rigorous, and besprinkling with most bitter alloy all my unlawful pleasures, that I might seek pleasures without alloy. But where to find such I could not discover, save in thee, O Lord, who teachest by sorrow, and woundest us, to heal, and killest us, lest we die from thee. Where was I, and how far was I exiled from the delights of thy house, in that 16th year of the age of my flesh, when the madness of lust, to which human shamelessness giveth free license, though unlicensed by thy laws, took the rule over me, and I resigned myself wholly to it. My friends, meanwhile, took no care by marriage to save my fall. Their only care was that I should learn to speak excellently and be a persuasive orator. For that year were my studies intermitted, whilst after my return from Medora, a neighbour city, whither I had journeyed to learn grammar and rhetoric, the expenses for a further journey to Carthage were being provided for me, and that rather by the resolution than the means of my father, who was but a poor freeman of Thagaste. To whom tell I this? Not to thee, my God, but before thee to mine own kind, even to that small portion of mankind as may light upon these writings of mine. And to what purpose? That whosoever reads this may think out of what depths we are to cry unto thee. For what is nearer to thine ears than a confessing heart, and a life of faith? Who did not extol my father, for that beyond the ability of his means, he would furnish his son with all necessaries for a far journey for his studies' sake? For many far abler citizens did no such thing for their children, but yet this same father had no concern how I grew towards thee, or how chaste I were, so that I were but copious in speech, however barren I were to thy culture, O God, who art the only true and good Lord of thy field, my heart. But while in that my 16th year I lived with my parents, leaving all school for a while, a season of idleness being interposed through the narrowness of my parents' fortunes, the briars of unclean desires grew rank over my head, and there was no hand to root them out. When that my father saw me at the baths, now growing towards manhood, and endued with a restless youthfulness, he, as already hence anticipating his descendants, gladly told it to my mother, rejoicing in that tumult of the senses wherein the world forgetteth thee its creator, and becometh enamoured of thy creature, instead of thyself, through the fumes of that invisible wine of its self-will, turning aside and bowing down to the very basest things. But in my mother's breast thou hadst already begun thy temple, and the foundation of thy holy habitation, whereas my father was as yet but a catechumen, and that but recently. She then was startled with a holy fear and trembling, and though I was not as yet baptized, feared for me those crooked ways in which they walk who turn their back to thee, and not their face. Woe is me! And dare I say that thou heldest thy peace, O my God, while I wandered further from thee? Didst thou then indeed hold thy peace to me? And whose but thine were these words which by my mother, thy faithful one, thou sangest in my ears, nothing whereof sunk into my heart, so as to do it? For she wished, and I remember in private with great anxiety warned me, not to commit fornication, but especially never to defile another man's wife. These seemed to me womanish advices, which I should blush to obey. But they were thine, and I knew it not, and I thought thou wert silent, and that it was she who spake, by whom thou wert not silent unto me, and in her wast despised by me, her son, the son of thy handmaid, thy servant. But I knew it not, and ran headlong with such blindness that amongst my equals I was ashamed of a less shamelessness, when I heard them boast of their flagitiousness, yea, and the more boasting, the more they were degraded, and I took pleasure, not only in the pleasure of the deed, but in the praise. What is worthy of dispraise but vice? But I made myself worse than I was, that I might not be dispraised. And when in anything I had not sinned as the abandoned ones, I would say that I had done what I had not done, that I might not seem contemptible in proportion as I was innocent, or of less account, the more chaste. Behold, with what companions I walked the streets of Babylon, and wallowed in the mire thereof, as if in a bed of spices and precious ointments. And that I might cleave the faster to its very centre, the invisible enemy trod me down and seduced me, for that I was easy to be seduced. Neither did the mother of my flesh, who had now fled out of the centre of Babylon, yet went more slowly in the skirts thereof, as she advised me to chastity, so heed what she had heard of me from her husband, as to restrain within the bounds of conjugal affection, if it could not be pared away to the quick, what she felt to be pestilent at present, and for the future dangerous. She heeded not this, for she feared lest a wife should prove a clog and hindrance to my hopes. Not those hopes of the world to come which my mother reposed in thee, but the hope of learning, which both my parents were too desirous I should attain. My father, because he had next to no thought of thee, and of me but vain conceits. My mother, because she accounted that those usual courses of learning would not only be no hindrance, but even some furtherance towards attaining thee. For thus I conjecture, recalling, as well as I may, the disposition of my parents. The reins, meantime, were slackened to me, beyond all temper of due severity, to spend my time in sport, yea, even unto dissoluteness in whatsoever I affected. And in all was a mist, intercepting from me, O my God, the brightness of thy truth, and mine iniquity burst out as from very fatness. Theft is punished by thy law, O Lord, and the law written in the hearts of men, which iniquity itself effaces not. For what thief will abide a thief? Not even a rich thief, one stealing through want. Yet I lusted to thieve, and did it, compelled by no hunger nor poverty, but through a cloydness of well-doing and a pamperedness of iniquity. For I stole that, of which I had enough, and much better. Nor cared I to enjoy what I stole, but joyed in the theft and sin itself. A pear tree there was near our vineyard, laden with fruit, tempting neither for colour nor taste. To shake and rob this, some lewd young fellows of us went, late one night, having, according to our pestilent custom, prolonged our sports in the streets till then, and took huge loads, not for our eating, but to fling to the very hogs, having only tasted them. And this, but to do what we liked only, because it was misliked. Behold my heart, O God, behold my heart, which thou hadst pity upon in the bottom of the bottomless pit. Now, behold, let my heart tell thee what it sought there, that I should be gratuitously evil, having no temptation to ill, but the ill itself. It was foul, and I loved it. I loved to perish. I loved mine own fault, not that for which I was faulty, but my fault itself. Foul soul, falling from thy firmament to utter destruction, not seeking aught through the shame, but the shame itself. For there is an attractiveness in beautiful bodies, in gold and silver, and all things, and in bodily touch, sympathy hath much influence, and each other sense hath his proper object answerably tempered. Worldly honour hath also its grace, and the power of overcoming, and of mastery, whence springs also the thirst of revenge. But yet, to obtain all these, we may not depart from thee, O Lord, nor decline from thy law. The life also which here we live hath its own enchantment, through a certain proportion of its own, and a correspondence with all things beautiful here below. Human friendship also is endeared with a sweet tie, by reason of the unity formed of many souls. Upon occasion of all these, and the like, is sin committed, while through an immoderate inclination towards these goods of the lowest order, the better and higher are forsaken. Thou, our Lord God, thy truth and thy law. For these lower things have their delights, but not like my God, who made all things. For in him doth the righteous delight, and he is the joy of the upright in heart. When, then, we ask why a crime was done, we believe it not, unless it appear that there might have been some desire of obtaining some of those which we called lower goods, or a fear of losing them. For they are beautiful and comely, although compared with those higher and beatific goods, they be abject and low. A man hath murdered another. Why? He loved his wife or his estate, or would rob for his own livelihood, or feared to lose some such things by him, or, wronged, was on fire to be revenged. Would any commit murder upon no cause, delighted simply in murdering? Who would believe it? For as for that furious and savage man, of whom it is said that he was gratuitously evil and cruel, yet is the cause assigned, lest, saith he, through idleness hand or heart should grow inactive. And to what end? That through that practice of guilt he might, having taken the city, attain to honours, empire, riches, and be freed from fear of the laws and his embarrassments from domestic needs and consciousness of villainies. So then, not even Catiline himself loved his own villainies, but something else, for whose sake he did them. What then did wretched I so love in thee, thou theft of mine, thou deed of darkness, in that 16th year of my age? Lovely thou wert not, because thou wert theft, but art thou anything, that thus I speak to thee? Fair were the pears we stole, because they were thy creation, thou fairest of all, creator of all, thou good God, God, the sovereign good and my true good. Fair were those pears, but not them did my wretched soul desire, for I had store of better, and those I gathered, only that I might steal. For when gathered, I flung them away, my only feast therein being my own sin, which I was pleased to enjoy. For if aught of those pears came within my mouth, what sweetened it was the sin. And now, O Lord my God, I inquire what in that theft delighted me, and behold, it hath no loveliness. I mean not such loveliness as in justice and wisdom, nor such as is in the mind and memory and senses and animal life of man, nor yet as the stars are glorious and beautiful in their orbs, or the earth or sea full of embryo life, replacing by its birth that which decayeth. Nay, nor even that false and shadowy beauty which belongeth to deceiving vices. For so doth pride imitate exaltedness, whereas thou alone art God exalted over all. Ambition, what seeks it but honours and glory, whereas thou alone art to be honoured above all and glorious for evermore. The cruelty of the great would fain be feared, but who is to be feared but God alone, out of whose power what can be wrested or withdrawn? When, or where, or whither, or by whom? The tendernesses of the wanton would fain be counted love, yet is nothing more tender than thy charity, nor is aught loved more healthfully than that thy truth, bright and beautiful above all. Curiosity makes semblance of a desire of knowledge, whereas thou supremely knowest all. Yea, ignorance and foolishness itself is cloaked under the name of simplicity and uninjuriousness, because nothing is found more single than thee, and what less injurious, since they are his own works which injure the sinner. Yea, sloth would fain be at rest, but what stable rest besides the Lord? Luxury affects to be called plenty and abundance, but thou art the fullness and never failing plenteousness of incorruptible pleasures. Prodigality presents a shadow of liberality, but thou art the most overflowing giver of all good. Covetousness would possess many things, and thou possessest all things. Envy disputes for excellency. What more excellent than thou? Anger seeks revenge. Who revenges more justly than thou? Fear startles at things unwanted and sudden, which endangers things beloved and takes forethought for their safety. But to thee, what unwanted or sudden? Or who separateth from thee what thou lovest? Or where but with thee is unshaken safety? Grief pines away for things lost, the delight of its desires, because it would have nothing taken from it, as nothing can from thee. Thus doth the soul commit fornication, when she turns from thee, seeking without thee what she findeth not pure and untainted, till she returns to thee. Thus all pervertedly imitate thee, who remove far from thee, and lift themselves up against thee. But even by thus imitating thee, they imply thee to be the creator of all nature, whence there is no place whither altogether to retire from thee. What then did I love in that theft? And wherein did I even corruptly and pervertedly imitate my Lord? Did I wish even by stealth to do contrary to thy law, because by power I could not, so that being a prisoner I might mimic a maimed liberty by doing with impunity things unpermitted me, a darkened likeness of thy omnipotency? Behold, thy servant, fleeing from his Lord, and obtaining a shadow. O rottenness, O monstrousness of life, and depth of death! Could I like what I might not, only because I might not? What shall I render unto the Lord, that whilst my memory recalls these things, my soul is not affrighted at them? I will love thee, O Lord, and thank thee, and confess unto thy name, because thou hast forgiven me these so great and heinous deeds of mine. To thy grace I ascribe it, and to thy mercy, that thou hast melted away my sins, as it were ice. To thy grace I ascribe also whatsoever I have not done of evil. For what might I not have done, who even loved a sin for its own sake? Yea, all I confess to have been forgiven me, both what evils I committed by my own wilfulness, and what by thy guidance I committed not. What man is he, who, weighing his own infirmity, dares to ascribe his purity and innocency to his own strength, that so he should love thee the less, as if he had less needed thy mercy, whereby thou remittest sins to those that turn to thee? For whosoever, called by thee, followed thy voice, and avoided those things which he reads me recalling and confessing of myself, let him not scorn me, who being sick was cured by that physician, through whose aid it was that he was not, or rather was less, sick. And for this let him love thee as much, yea, and more, since by whom he sees me to have been recovered from such deep consumption of sin, by him he sees himself to have been from the like consumption of sin preserved. What fruit had I then, wretched man, in those things, of the remembrance whereof I am now ashamed, especially in that theft which I loved for the theft's sake, and it too was nothing, and therefore the more miserable I who loved it. Yet alone I had not done it. Such was I then, I remember, alone I had never done it. I loved then in it also the company of the accomplices with whom I did it. I did not then love nothing else but the theft, yea rather I did love nothing else, for that circumstance of the company was also nothing. What is, in truth? Who can teach me, save he that enlighteneth my heart and discovereth its dark corners? What is it which hath come into my mind to inquire and discuss and consider? For had I then loved the pears I stole, and wished to enjoy them, I might have done it alone, had the bare commission of the theft sufficed to attain my pleasure, nor needed I have inflamed the itching of my desires by the excitement of accomplices. But since my pleasure was not in those pears, it was in the offence itself, which the company of fellow sinners occasioned. What then was this feeling? For of a truth it was too foul, and woe was me who had it. But yet what was it? Who can understand his errors? It was the sport, which as it were tickled our hearts, that we beguiled those who little thought what we were doing, and much disliked it. Why then was my delight of such sort that I did it not alone? Because none doth ordinarily laugh alone. Ordinarily no one, yet laughter sometimes masters men alone and singly, when no one whatever is with them, if anything very ludicrous presents itself to their senses or mind. Yet I had not done this alone. Alone I had never done it. Behold, my God, before thee, the vivid remembrance of my soul. Alone I had never committed that theft, wherein what I stole pleased me not, but that I stole, nor had it alone like me to do it, nor had I done it. O friendship too unfriendly, thou incomprehensible inveigler of the soul, thou greediness to do mischief out of mirth and wantonness, thou thirst of others' loss, without lust of my own gain or revenge. But when it is said, let's go, let's do it, we are ashamed not to be shameless. Who can disentangle that twisted and intricate knottiness? Foul is it. I hate to think on it, to look on it. But thee I long for, O righteousness and innocency, beautiful and comely to all pure eyes, and of a satisfaction unsating. With thee is rest entire, and life imperturbable. Whoso enters into thee enters into the joy of his Lord, and shall not fear, and shall do excellently in the all-excellent. I sank away from thee, and I wandered, O my God, too much astray from thee my stay, in these days of my youth, and I became to myself a barren land. Book 3. To Carthage I came, where there sang all around me in my ears a cauldron of unholy loves. I loved not yet I loved to love, and out of a deep-seated want I hated myself for wanting not. I sought what I might love, in love with loving, and safety I hated, and a way without snares. For within me was a famine of that inward food, thyself, my God. Yet, through that famine, I was not hungered, but was without all longing for incorruptible sustenance, not because filled therewith, but the more empty, the more I loathed it. For this cause my soul was sickly and full of sores, it miserably cast itself forth, desiring to be scraped by the touch of objects of sense. Yet if these had not a soul, they would not be objects of love. To love then, and to be beloved, was sweet to me. But more, when I obtained to enjoy the person I loved, I defiled, therefore, the spring of friendship with the filth of concupiscence, and I beclouded its brightness with the hell of lustfulness. And thus, foul and unseemly, I would fain, through exceeding vanity, be fine and courtly. I fell headlong then into the love wherein I longed to be ensnared. My God, my mercy, with how much gall didst thou out of thy great goodness besprinkle for me that sweetness? For I was both beloved and secretly arrived at the bond of enjoying, and was with joy fettered with sorrow-bringing bonds, that I might be scourged with the iron-burning rods of jealousy, and suspicions, and fears, and angers, and quarrels. Stage plays also carried me away, full of images of my miseries, and of fuel to my fire. Why is it that man desires to be made sad, beholding doleful and tragical things, which yet himself would no means suffer? Yet he desires as a spectator to feel sorrow at them, and this very sorrow is his pleasure. What is this but a miserable madness? For a man is the more affected with these actions, the less free he is from such affections. Howsoever, when he suffers in his own person, it uses to be styled misery. When he compassionates others, then it is mercy. But what sort of compassion is this for feigned and scenical passions? For the auditor is not called on to relieve, but only to grieve, and he applauds the actor of these fictions the more he grieves. And if the calamities of those persons, whether of old times or mere fiction, be so acted that the spectator is not moved to tears, he goes away disgusted and criticizing. But if he be moved to passion, he stays intent and weeps for joy. Are griefs then too loved? Verily all desire joy. Or whereas no man likes to be miserable, is he yet pleased to be merciful? Which, because it cannot be without passion, for this reason alone are passions loved. This also springs from that vein of friendship. But whither goes that vein? Whither flows it? Wherefore runs it into that torrent of pitch, bubbling forth those monstrous tides of foul lustfulness, into which it is wilfully changed and transformed, being of its own will precipitated and corrupted from its heavenly clearness? Shall compassion then be put away? By no means. Be griefs then sometimes loved? But beware of uncleanness, O my soul, under the guardianship of my God, the God of our fathers, who is to be praised and exalted above all forever. Beware of uncleanness. For I have not now ceased to pity, but then in the theatres I rejoiced with lovers, when they wickedly enjoyed one another, although this was imaginary only in the play. And when they lost one another, as if very compassionate, I sorrowed with them, yet had my delight in both. But now I much more pity him that rejoiceth in his wickedness, than him who is thought to suffer hardship by missing some pernicious pleasure and the loss of some miserable felicity. This certainly is the truer mercy, but in it grief delights not. For though he that grieves for the miserable be commended for his office of charity, yet had he, who is genuinely compassionate, rather there were nothing for him to grieve for. For if good will be ill-willed, which can never be, then may he, who truly and sincerely commiserates, wish there might be some miserable that he might commiserate. Some sorrow may then be allowed, none loved. For thus dost thou, O Lord God, who lovest souls far more purely than we, and hast more incorruptibly pity on them, yet are wounded with no sorrowfulness. And who is sufficient for these things? But I, miserable, then loved to grieve, and sought out what to grieve at, when in another's, and that feigned and personated misery, that acting best pleased me, and attracted me the most vehemently, which drew tears from me. What marvel that an unhappy sheep, straying from thy flock, and impatient of thy keeping, I became infected with a foul disease. And hence the love of griefs, not such as should sink deep into me. For I loved not to suffer, what I loved to look on, but such as upon hearing their fictions should lightly scratch the surface, upon which, as on envenomed nails, followed inflamed swelling, impostumes, and a putrefied sore. My life being such, was it life, O my God? And thy faithful mercy hovered over me afar. Upon how grievous iniquities consumed I myself, pursuing a sacrilegious curiosity, that having forsaken thee, it might bring me to the treacherous abyss, and the beguiling service of devils, to whom I sacrificed my evil actions, and in all these things thou didst scourge me. I dared even, while thy solemnities were celebrated within the walls of thy church, to desire and to compass a business deserving death for its fruits, for which thou scourgest me with grievous punishments, though nothing to my fault. O thou my exceeding mercy, my God, my refuge from those terrible destroyers, among whom I wandered with a stiff neck, withdrawing further from thee, loving mine own ways, and not thine, loving a vagrant liberty. Those studies also, which were accounted commendable, had a view to excelling in the courts of litigation. The more bepraised, the craftier. Such is men's blindness, glorying even in their blindness. And now I was chief in the rhetoric school, whereat I joyed proudly, and I swelled with arrogancy, though, Lord, thou knowest, far quieter, and altogether removed from the subvertings of those subverters. For this ill-omened and devilish name was the very badge of gallantry, among whom I lived, with a shameless shame that I was not even as they. With them I lived, and was sometimes delighted with their friendship, whose doings I ever did abhor, i.e., their subvertings, wherewith they wantonly persecuted the modesty of strangers, which they disturbed by a gratuitous jeering, feeding thereon their malicious birth. Nothing can be liker the very actions of devils than these. What then could they be more truly called than subverters? Themselves subverted, and altogether perverted first, the deceiving spirits secretly deriding and seducing them, wherein themselves delight to jeer at and deceive others. Among such as these, in that unsettled age of mine, learned I books of eloquence, wherein I desired to be eminent out of a damnable and vainglorious end, a joy in human vanity. In the ordinary course of study, I fell upon a certain book of Cicero, whose speech almost all admire, not so his heart. This book of his contains an exhortation to philosophy, and is called Hortensius. But this book altered my affections, and turned my prayers to thyself, O Lord, and made me have other purposes and desires. Every vain hope at once became worthless to me, and I longed with an incredibly burning desire for an immortality of wisdom, and began now to arise, that I might return to thee. For not to sharpen my tongue, which thing I seemed to be purchasing with my mother's allowances, in that my 19th year, my father being dead 2 years before, not to sharpen my tongue did I employ that book, nor did it infuse into me its style, but its matter. How did I burn then, my God? How did I burn to remount from earthly things to thee? Nor knew I what thou wouldest do with me. For with thee is wisdom. But the love of wisdom is in Greek called philosophy, with which that book inflamed me. Some there be that seduce through philosophy, under a great and smooth and honourable name, colouring and disguising their own errors, and almost all who in that and former ages were such, are in that book censured and set forth. There also is made plain that wholesome advice of thy Spirit by thy good and devout servant. Beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ. For in him dwelleth all the fullness of the Godhead bodily. And since at that time thou, O light of my heart, knowest apostolic scripture was not known to me, I was delighted with that exhortation, so far only that I was thereby strongly roused and kindled and inflamed to love and seek and obtain and hold and embrace not this or that sect, but wisdom itself, whatever it were. And this alone checked me thus unkindled, that the name of Christ was not in it. For this name, according to thy mercy, O Lord, this name of my Saviour thy Son, had my tender heart, even with my mother's milk, devoutly drunk in and deeply treasured. And whatsoever was without that name, though never so learned, polished, or true, took not entire hold of me. I resolved then to bend my mind to the Holy Scriptures, that I might see what they were. But behold, I see a thing not understood by the proud, nor laid open to children, lowly in access, in its recesses lofty, and veiled with mysteries. And I was not such as could enter into it, or stoop my neck to follow its steps. For not as I now speak, did I feel when I turned to those scriptures, but they seemed to me unworthy to be compared to the stateliness of Tully, for my swelling pride shrunk from their lowliness, nor could my sharp wit pierce the interior thereof. Yet were they such as would grow up in a little one. But I disdained to be a little one, and swollen with pride took myself to be a great one. Therefore I fell among men proudly doting, exceeding carnal and prating, in whose mouths were the snares of the devil, limed with the mixture of the syllables of thy name, and of our Lord Jesus Christ, and of the Holy Ghost, the Paraclete, our Comforter. These names departed not out of their mouth, but so far forth as the sound only and the noise of the tongue, for the heart was void of truth. Yet they cried out, Truth, truth, and spake much thereof to me. Yet it was not in them. But they spake falsehood, not of thee only, who truly art truth, but even of those elements of this world, thy creatures. And I indeed ought to have passed by even philosophers who spake truth concerning them, for love of thee, my Father, supremely good, beauty of all things beautiful. O truth, truth, how inwardly did even then the marrow of my soul pant after thee, when they often and diversely, and in many and huge books, echoed of thee to me, though it was but an echo. And these were the dishes wherein to me, hungering after thee, they, instead of thee, served up the sun and moon, beautiful works of thine, but yet thy works, not thyself, no, nor thy first works. For thy spiritual works are before these corporeal works, celestial though they be, and shining. But I hungered and thirsted, not even after those first works of thine, but after thee thyself, the truth, in whom is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. Yet they still set before me in those dishes, glittering fantasies, than which better were it to love this very sun, which is real to our sight at least, than those fantasies which by our eyes deceive our mind. Yet because I thought them to be thee, I fed thereon, not eagerly, for thou didst not in them taste to me as thou art, for thou wast not these emptinesses, nor was I nourished by them, but exhausted rather. Food in sleep shows very like our food awake, yet are not those asleep nourished by it, for they are asleep. But those were not even any way like to thee, as thou hast now spoken to me. For those were corporeal fantasies, false bodies, than which these true bodies, celestial or terrestrial, which with our fleshly sight we behold, are far more certain. These things the beasts and birds discern as well as we, and they are more certain than when we fancy them. And again, we do with more certainty fancy them, than by them conjecture other vaster and infinite bodies which have no being. Such empty husks was I then fed on, and was not fed. But thou, my soul's love, in looking for whom I fail, that I may become strong, art neither those bodies which we see, though in heaven, nor those which we see not there, for thou hast created them, nor dost thou account them among the chiefest of thy works. How far then art thou from those fantasies of mine, fantasies of bodies which altogether are not, than which the images of those bodies, which are far more certain, and more certain still the bodies themselves, which yet thou art not. No, nor yet the soul, which is the life of the bodies. So then, better and more certain is the life of the bodies than the bodies. But thou art the life of souls, the life of lives, having life in thyself, and changest not, life of my soul. Where then wert thou then to me, and how far from me? Far verily was I straying from thee, barred from the very husks of the swine, whom with husks I fed. For how much better are the fables of poets and grammarians than these snares? For verses, and poems, and Medea flying, are more profitable truly than these men's 5 elements, variously disguised, answering to 5 dens of darkness, which have no being, yet slay the believer. For verses and poems I can turn to true food, and Medea flying. Though I did sing, I maintained not. Though I heard it sung, I believed not. But those things I did believe. Woe, woe, by what steps was I brought down to the depths of hell, toiling and turmoiling through want of truth, since I sought after thee, my God. To thee I confess it, who hadst mercy on me, not as yet confessing, not according to the understanding of the mind, wherein thou willedst that I should excel the beasts, but according to the sense of the flesh. But thou wert more inward to me than my most inward part, and higher than my highest. I lighted upon that bold woman, simple and knoweth nothing, shadowed out in Solomon, sitting at the door and saying, Eat ye bread of secrecies willingly, and drink ye stolen waters which are sweet. She seduced me, because she found my soul dwelling abroad in the eye of my flesh, and ruminating on such food as through it I had devoured. For other than this, that which really is I knew not, and was, as it were through sharpness of wit, persuaded to assent to foolish deceivers, when they ask me, Whence is evil? Is God bounded by a bodily shape, and has hairs and nails? Are they to be esteemed righteous, who had many wives at once, and did kill men, and sacrifice living creatures? At which I, in my ignorance, was much troubled, and departing from the truth, seemed to myself to be making towards it, because as yet I knew not that evil was nothing but a privation of good, until at last a thing ceases altogether to be, which how should I see, the sight of whose eyes reached only to bodies, and of my mind to a phantasm? And I knew not God to be a spirit, not one who hath parts extended in length and breadth, or whose being was bulk, for every bulk is less in a part than in the whole, and if it be infinite, it must be less in such part as is defined by a certain space than in its infinitude, and so is not wholly everywhere as spirit, as God. And what that should be in us, by which we were like to God, and might be rightly said to be after the image of God, I was altogether ignorant. Nor knew I that true inward righteousness, which judgeth not according to custom, but out of the most rightful law of God Almighty, whereby the ways of places and times were disposed according to those times and places, itself meantime being the same always and everywhere, not one thing in one place, and another in another, according to which Abraham and Isaac, and Jacob, and Moses, and David were righteous, and all those commended by the mouth of God, but were judged unrighteous by silly men, judging out of man's judgment, and measuring by their own petty habits the moral habits of the whole human race. As if in an armory, one ignorant what were adapted to each part should cover his head with greaves, or seek to be shod with a helmet, and complain that they fitted not. Or, as if on a day when business is publicly stopped in the afternoon, one were angered at not being allowed to keep open shop because he had been in the forenoon. Or, when in one house he observeth some servant take a thing in his hand, which the butler is not suffered to meddle with. Or something permitted out of doors, which is forbidden in the dining room, and should be angry that in one house and one family the same thing is not allotted everywhere and to all. Even such are they who are fretted to hear something to have been lawful for righteous men formerly, which now is not, or that God, for certain temporal respects, commanded them one thing, and these another, obeying both the same righteousness. Whereas they see, in one man, and one day, and one house, different things to be fit for different members, and a thing formerly lawful, after a certain time not so. In one corner permitted or commanded, but in another rightly forbidden and punished. Is justice therefore various or mutable? No, but the times over which it presides flow not evenly, because they are times, but men whose days are few upon the earth, for that by their senses they cannot harmonize the causes of things in former ages and other nations, which they had not experience of, with these which they have experience of, whereas in one and the same body, day, or family, they easily see what is fitting for each member and season, part, and person. To the one they take exceptions, to the other they submit. These things I then knew not, nor observed. They struck my sight on all sides, and I saw them not. I indited verses, in which I might not place every foot everywhere, but differently in different meters, nor even in any one meter the self-same foot in all places. Yet the art itself, by which I indited, had not different principles for these different cases, but comprised all in one. Still I saw not how that righteousness, which good and holy men obeyed, did far more excellently and sublimely contain in one all those things which God commanded, and in no part varied, although in varying times it prescribed not every thing at once, but apportioned and enjoined what was fit for each. And I, in my blindness, censured the holy fathers, not only wherein they made use of things present as God commanded and inspired them, but also wherein they were foretelling things to come, as God was revealing in them. Can it at any time or place be unjust to love God with all his heart, with all his soul, and with all his mind, and his neighbour as himself? Therefore are those foul offences which be against nature to be everywhere and at all times detested and punished, such as were those of the men of Sodom, which should all nations commit, they should all stand guilty of the same crime, by the law of God, which hath not so made men that they should so abuse one another. For even that intercourse which should be between God and us is violated, when that same nature, of which he is author, is polluted by perversity of lust. But those actions which are offences against the customs of men are to be avoided according to the customs severally prevailing, so that a thing agreed upon and confirmed by custom or law of any city or nation may not be violated at the lawless pleasure of any, whether native or foreigner. For any part which harmonizeth not with its whole is offensive. But when God commands a thing to be done against the customs or compact of any people, though it were never by them done heretofore, it is to be done, and if intermitted, it is to be restored, and if never ordained, is now to be ordained. For lawful if it be for a king, in the state which he reigns over, to command that which no one before him, nor he himself heretofore, had commanded, and to obey him cannot be against the common weal of the state. Nay, it were against it if he were not obeyed, for to obey princes is a general compact of human society. How much more unhesitatingly ought we to obey God, in all which he commands, the ruler of all his creatures? For as among the powers in man's society, the greater authority is obeyed in preference to the lesser, so must God above all. So in acts of violence, where there is a wish to hurt, whether by reproach or injury, and these either for revenge, as one enemy against another, or for some profit belonging to another, as the robber to the traveller, or to avoid some evil, as towards one who is feared, or through envy, as one less fortunate to one more so, or one well thriven in anything. These be the heads of iniquity which spring from the lust of the flesh, of the eye, or of rule, either singly, or two combined, or all together. And so do men live ill against the 3 and 7, that psaltery of 10 strings, thy 10 commandments, O God, most high and most sweet. But what foul offences can there be against thee, who canst not be defiled? Or what acts of violence against thee, who canst not be harmed? But thou avengest what men commit against themselves, seeing also when they sin against thee, they do wickedly against their own souls, and iniquity gives itself the lie, by corrupting and perverting their nature, which thou hast created and ordained, or by an immoderate use of things allowed, or in burning in things unallowed, to that use which is against nature. Or are found guilty, raging with heart and tongue against thee, kicking against the pricks, or when, bursting the pale of human society, they boldly joy in self-willed combinations or divisions, according as they have any object to gain or subject of offence. And these things are done when thou art forsaken, O fountain of life, who art the only and true creator and governor of the universe, and by a self-willed pride, any one false thing is selected therefrom and loved. So then by a humble devoutness we return to thee, and thou cleansest us from our evil habits, and art merciful to their sins who confess, and hearest the groaning of the prisoner, and loosest us from the chains which we made for ourselves, if we lift not up against thee the horns of an unreal liberty, suffering the loss of all through covetousness of more, by loving more our own private good than thee, the good of all. Amidst these offences of foulness and violence, and so many iniquities, are sins of men, who are on the whole making proficiency, which by those that judge rightly are, after the rule of perfection, discommended, yet the persons commended, upon hope of future fruit, as in the green blade of growing corn. And there are some, resembling offences of foulness or violence, which yet are no sins, because they offend neither thee, our Lord God, nor human society, when, namely, things fitting for a given period are obtained for the service of life, and we know not whether out of a lust of having, or when things are, for the sake of correction, by constituted authority punished, and we know not whether out of a lust of hurting. Many an action, then, which in men's sight is disapproved, is by thy testimony approved, and many, by men praised, are, thou being witness, condemned, because the show of the action, and the mind of the doer, and the unknown exigency of the period severally vary. But when thou on a sudden commandest an unwanted and unthought of thing, yea, although thou hast sometime forbidden it, and still for the time hidest the reason of thy command, and it be against the ordinance of some society of men, who doubts but it is to be done, seeing that society of men is just which serves thee. But blessed are they who know thy commands. For all things were done by thy servants, either to show forth something needful for the present, or to foreshow things to come. These things I, being ignorant of, scoffed at those thy holy servants and prophets. And what gained I by scoffing at them, but to be scoffed at by thee, being insensibly and step by step drawn on to those follies, as to believe that a fig tree wept when it was plucked, and the tree, its mother, shed milky tears? Which fig, notwithstanding, plucked by some others, not his own, guilt, had some Manichaean saint eaten, and mingled with his bowels, he should breathe out of it angels. Yea, there shall burst forth particles of divinity, at every moan or groan in his prayer, which particles of the most high and true God had remained bound in that fig, unless they had been set at liberty by the teeth or belly of some elect saint. And I, miserable, believed that more mercy was to be shown to the fruits of the earth than men, for whom they were created. For if any one an hungered, not a Manichaean, should ask for any, that morsel would seem as it were condemned to capital punishment, which should be given him. And thou sentest thine hand from above, and drewest my soul out of that profound darkness, my mother, thy faithful one, weeping to thee for me more than mothers weep the bodily deaths of their children. For she, by that faith and spirit which she had from thee, discerned the death wherein I lay, and thou heardest her, O Lord. Thou heardest her, and despised not her tears, when streaming down, they watered the ground under her eyes in every place where she prayed. Yea, thou heardest her. For whence was that dream whereby thou comfortedst her? So that she allowed me to live with her, and to eat at the same table in the house, which she had begun to shrink from, abhorring and detesting the blasphemies of my error. For she saw herself standing on a certain wooden rule, and a shining youth coming towards her, cheerful and smiling upon her, herself grieving and overwhelmed with grief. But he having, in order to instruct, as is their wont not to be instructed, inquired of her the causes of her grief and daily tears, and she answering that she was bewailing my perdition, he bade her rest contented, and told her to look and observe, that where she was, there was I also. And when she looked, she saw me standing by her in the same rule. Whence was this, but that thine ears were towards her heart? O thou good omnipotent, who so carest for every one of us, as if thou caredest for him only, and so for all, as if they were but one. Whence was this also, that when she had told me this vision, and I would fain bend it to mean, that she rather should not despair of being one day what I was. She presently, without any hesitation, replies, No, for it was not told me that where he, there thou also, but where thou, there he also. I confess to thee, O Lord, that to the best of my remembrance, and I have oft spoken of this, that thy answer, through my waking mother, that she was not perplexed by the plausibility of my false interpretation, and so quickly saw what was to be seen, and which I certainly had not perceived before she spake, even then moved me more than the dream itself, by which a joy to the holy woman, to be fulfilled so long after, was, for the consolation of her present anguish, so long before foresignified. For almost 9 years past, in which I wallowed in the mire of that deep pit, and the darkness of falsehood, often essaying to rise, but dashed down the more grievously. All which time that chaste, godly, and sober widow, such as thou lovest, now more cheered with hope, yet no whit relaxing in her weeping and mourning, ceased not at all hours of her devotions to bewail my case unto thee, and her prayers entered into thy presence, and yet thou sufferedst me to be yet involved and re-involved in that darkness. Thou gavest her meantime another answer, which I call to mind, for much I pass by, hasting to those things which more press me to confess unto thee, and much I do not remember. Thou gavest her then another answer by a priest of thine, a certain bishop brought up in thy church, and well studied in thy books, whom when this woman had entreated to vouchsafe to converse with me, refute my errors, unteach me ill things, and teach me good things, for this he was wont to do when he found persons fitted to receive it, he refused wisely, as I afterwards perceived. For he answered that I was yet unteachable, being puffed up with the novelty of that heresy, and had already perplexed divers unskilful persons with captious questions, as she had told him. But let him alone a while, saith he. Only pray God for him. He will of himself by reading find what that error is, and how great its impiety. At the same time he told her how himself, when a little one, had by his seduced mother been consigned over to the Manichees, and had not only read, but frequently copied out almost all their books, and had, without any argument or proof from anyone, seen how much that sect was to be avoided, and had avoided it. Which, when he had said, and she would not be satisfied, but urged him more, with entreaties and many tears, that he would see me and discourse with me, he, a little displeased at her importunity, saith, Go thy ways, and God bless thee, for it is not possible that the son of these tears should perish. Which answer she took, as she often mentioned in her conversations with me, as if it had sounded from heaven. Book 4. For this space of 9 years, from my 19th year to my 28th, we lived seduced and seducing, deceived and deceiving, in divers lusts, openly by sciences which they call liberal, secretly with a false-named religion, here proud, there superstitious, everywhere vain, here hunting after the emptiness of popular praise, down even to theatrical applauses and poetic prizes, and strifes for grassy garlands, and the follies of shows, and the intemperance of desires. There, desiring to be cleansed from these defilements by carrying food to those who were called elect and holy, out of which, in the workhouse of their stomachs, they should forge for us angels and gods, by whom we might be cleansed. These things did I follow and practice with my friends, deceived by me and with me. Let the arrogant mock me, and such as have not been, to their soul's health, stricken and cast down by thee, O my God, but I would still confess to thee mine own shame in thy praise. Suffer me, I beseech thee, and give me grace to go over in my present remembrance the wanderings of my forepast time, and to offer unto thee the sacrifice of thanksgiving. For what am I to myself without thee, but a guide to mine own downfall? Or what am I even at the best, but an infant sucking the milk thou givest, and feeding upon thee the food that perisheth not? But what sort of man is any man, seeing he is but a man? Let now the strong and the mighty laugh at us, but let us poor and needy confess unto thee. In those years I taught rhetoric, and, overcome by cupidity, made sale of a loquacity to overcome by. Yet I preferred, Lord, thou knowest, honest scholars, as they are accounted, and these I, without artifice, taught artifices, not to be practised against the life of the guiltless, though sometimes for the life of the guilty. And thou, O God, from afar perceivedst me stumbling in that slippery course, and amid much smoke sending out some sparks of faithfulness, which I showed in that my guidance of such as loved vanity, and sought after leasing myself their companion. In those years I had one, not in that which is called lawful marriage, but whom I had found out in a wayward passion, void of understanding, yet but one, remaining faithful even to her, in whom I in my own case experienced what difference there is betwixt the self-restraint of the marriage covenant, for the sake of issue, and the bargain of a lustful love, where children are born against their parents' will, although, once born, they constrain love. I remember also that when I had settled to enter the lists for a theatrical prize, some wizard asked me what I would give him to win, but I, detesting and abhorring such foul mysteries, answered, though the garland were of imperishable gold, I would not suffer a fly to be killed to gain me it. For he was to kill some living creatures in his sacrifices, and by those honours to invite the devils to favour me. But this ill also I rejected, not out of a pure love for thee, O God of my heart, for I knew not how to love thee, who knew not how to conceive aught beyond a material brightness. And doth not a soul, sighing after such fictions, commit fornication against thee, trust in things unreal, and feed the wind? Still I would not forsooth have sacrifices offered to devils for me, to whom I was sacrificing myself by that superstition. For what else is it to feed the wind, but to feed them, that is by going astray to become their pleasure and derision? Those impostors, then, whom they style mathematicians, I consulted without scruple, because they seem to use no sacrifice, nor to pray to any spirit for their divinations, which art, however, Christian and true piety consistently rejects and condemns. For it is a good thing to confess unto thee, and to say, have mercy upon me, heal my soul, for I have sinned against thee, and not to abuse thy mercy for a license to sin, but to remember the Lord's words, behold, thou art made whole, sin no more, lest a worse thing come unto thee. All which wholesome advice they labour to destroy, saying, the cause of thy sin is inevitably determined in heaven, and this did Venus, or Saturn, or Mars, that man, forsooth, flesh and blood, and proud corruption, might be blameless, while the Creator and Ordainer of heaven and the stars is to bear the blame. And who is he but our God, the very sweetness and wellspring of righteousness, who renderest to every man according to his works, and a broken and contrite heart wilt thou not despise? There was in those days a wise man, very skilful in physic, and renowned therein, who had with his own proconsular hand put the agonistic garland upon my distempered head, but not as a physician. For this disease thou only curest, who resistest the proud, and givest grace to the humble. But didst thou fail me even by that old man, or forbear to heal my soul? For having become more acquainted with him, and hanging assiduously and fixedly on his speech, for though in simple terms it was vivid, lively, and earnest, when he had gathered by my discourse that I was given to the books of nativity casters, he kindly and fatherly advised me to cast them away, and not fruitlessly bestow a care and diligence, necessary for useful things, upon these vanities, saying that he had in his earliest years studied that art, so as to make it the profession whereby he should live, and that understanding Hippocrates, he could soon have understood such a study as this. And yet he had given it over, and taken to physic, for no other reason but that he found it utterly false. And he, a grave man, would not get his living by deluding people. But thou, saith he, hast rhetoric to maintain thyself by, so that thou followest this of free choice, not of necessity. The more then oughtest thou to give me credit herein, who laboured to acquire it so perfectly as to get my living by it alone. Of whom, when I had demanded, how then could many true things be foretold by it, he answered me, as he could, that the force of chance, diffused throughout the whole order of things, brought this about. For if, when a man by haphazard opens the pages of some poet who sang and thought of something wholly different, a verse oftentimes fell out, wondrously agreeable to the present business, it were not to be wondered at if out of the soul of man, unconscious what takes place in it, by some higher instinct an answer should be given by hap, not by art, corresponding to the business and actions of the demander. And thus much, either from or through him, thou conveyedst to me, and trace it in my memory, what I might hereafter examine for myself. But at that time, neither he, nor my dearest Nebridius, a youth singularly good and of a holy fear, who derided the whole body of divination, could persuade me to cast it aside, the authority of the authors swaying me yet more, and as yet I had found no certain proof, such as I sought, whereby it might without all doubt appear that what had been truly foretold by those consulted was the result of haphazard, not of the art of the star-gazers. In those years when I first began to teach rhetoric in my native town, I had made one my friend, but too dear to me, from a community of pursuits, of mine own age, and, as myself, in the first opening flower of youth. He had grown up of a child with me, and we had been both schoolfellows and playfellows. But he was not yet my friend as afterwards, nor even then, as true friendship is. For true it cannot be, unless in such as thou cementest together, cleaving unto thee, by that love which is shed abroad in our hearts by the Holy Ghost, which is given unto us. Yet was it but too sweet, ripened by the warmth of kindred studies. For from the true faith, which he as a youth had not soundly and thoroughly imbibed, I had warped him also to those superstitious and pernicious fables for which my mother bewailed me. With me he now erred in mind, nor could my soul be without him. But behold, thou wert close on the steps of thy fugitives, at once God of vengeance and fountain of mercies, turning us to thyself by wonderful means. Thou tookest that man out of this life, when he had scarce filled up one whole year of my friendship, sweet to me above all sweetness of that my life. Who can recount all thy praises, which he hath felt in his one self? What didst thou then, my God, and how unsearchable is the abyss of thy judgments? For long, sore sick of a fever, he lay senseless in a death sweat, and his recovery being despaired of, he was baptized, unknowing. Myself meanwhile little regarding, and presuming that his soul would retain rather what it had received of me, not what was wrought on his unconscious body. But it proved far otherwise, for he was refreshed and restored. Forthwith, as soon as I could speak with him, and I could so soon as he was able, for I never left him, and we hung but too much upon each other, I essayed to jest with him, as though he would jest with me at that baptism which he had received, when utterly absent in mind and feeling, but had now understood that he had received. But he so shrunk from me as from an enemy, and with a wonderful and sudden freedom bade me, as I would continue his friend, forbear such language to him. I, all astonished and amazed, suppressed all my emotions till he should grow well, and his health was strong enough for me to deal with him as I would. But he was taken away from my frenzy, that with thee he might be preserved for my comfort. A few days after, in my absence, he was attacked again by the fever, and so departed. At this grief my heart was utterly darkened, and whatever I beheld was death. My native country was a torment to me, and my father's house a strange unhappiness, and whatever I had shared with him, wanting him, became a distracting torture. Mine eyes sought him everywhere, but he was not granted them, and I hated all places, for that they had not him, nor could they now tell me, he is coming, as when he was alive and absent. I became a great riddle to myself, and I asked my soul why she was so sad, and why she disquieted me sorely. But she knew not what to answer me, and if I said, "Trust in God," she very rightly obeyed me not, because that most dear friend, whom she had lost, was, being man, both truer and better than that phantasm she was bid to trust in. Only tears were sweet to me, for they succeeded my friend in the dearest of my affections. And now, Lord, these things are passed by, and time hath assuaged my wound. May I learn from thee, who art truth, and approach the ear of my heart unto thy mouth, that thou mayest tell me why weeping is sweet to the miserable. Hast thou, although present everywhere, cast away our misery far from thee? And thou abidest in thyself, but we are tossed about in divers trials. And yet, unless we mourned in thine ears, we should have no hope left. Whence then is sweet fruit gathered from the bitterness of life, from groaning, tears, sighs, and complaints? Doth this sweeten it, that we hope thou hearest? This is true of prayer, for therein is a longing to approach unto thee. But is it also in grief for a thing lost, and the sorrow wherewith I was then overwhelmed? For I neither hoped he should return to life, nor did I desire this with my tears. But I wept only and grieved, for I was miserable and had lost my joy. Or is weeping indeed a bitter thing, and for very loathing of the things which we before enjoyed, does it then, when we shrink from them, please us? But what speak I of these things? For now is no time to question, but to confess unto thee. Wretched I was, and wretched is every soul bound by the friendship of perishable things. He is torn asunder when he loses them, and then he feels the wretchedness which he had ere yet he lost them. So was it then with me? I wept most bitterly, and found my repose in bitterness. Thus was I wretched, and that wretched life I held dearer than my friend. For though I would willingly have changed it, yet was I more unwilling to part with it than with him. Yea, I know not whether I would have parted with it even for him, as is related, if not feigned, of Pylades and Orestes, that they would gladly have died for each other or together, not to live together being to them worse than death. But in me there had arisen some unexplained feeling, too contrary to this, for at once I loathed exceedingly to live and feared to die. I suppose the more I loved him, the more did I hate, and fear, as a most cruel enemy, death, which had bereaved me of him, and I imagined it would speedily make an end of all men, since it had power over him. Thus was it with me, I remember. Behold my heart, O my God, behold and see into me, for well I remember it, O my hope, who cleansest me from the impurity of such affections, directing mine eyes towards thee, and plucking my feet out of the snare. For I wondered that others, subject to death, did live, since he whom I loved, as if he should never die, was dead. And I wondered yet more that myself, who was to him a second self, could live, he being dead. Well said one of his friend, thou half of my soul, for I felt that my soul and his soul were one soul in two bodies, and therefore was my life a horror to me, because I would not live halved. And therefore perchance I feared to die, lest he whom I had much loved should die wholly. O madness, which knowest not how to love men, like men! O foolish man that I then was, enduring impatiently the lot of man! I fretted then, sighed, wept, was distracted, had neither rest nor counsel. For I bore about a shattered and bleeding soul, impatient of being borne by me, yet where to repose it I found not. Not in calm groves, not in games and music, nor in fragrant spots, nor in curious banquetings, nor in the pleasures of the bed and the couch, nor, finally, in books or poesy, found it repose. All things looked ghastly, yea, the very light. Whatsoever was not what he was revolting and hateful, except groaning and tears. For in those alone found I a little refreshment, but when my soul was withdrawn from them, a huge load of misery weighed me down. To thee, O Lord, it ought to have been raised, for thee to lighten. I knew it, but neither could nor would. The more since, when I thought of thee, thou wert not to me any solid or substantial thing. For thou wert not thyself, but a mere phantom, and my error was my God. If I offered to discharge my load thereon, that it might rest, it glided through the void, and came rushing down again on me, and I had remained to myself a hapless spot, where I could neither be nor be from thence. For whither should my heart flee from my heart? Whither should I flee from myself? Whither not follow myself? And yet I fled out of my country, for so should mine eyes less look for him where they were not wont to see him. And thus from Thagaste I came to Carthage. Times lose no time, nor do they roll idly by. Through our senses they work strange operations on the mind. Behold, they went and came day by day, and by coming and going introduced into my mind other imaginations and other remembrances. and little by little patched me up again with my old kind of delights, unto which that my sorrow gave way. And yet there succeeded, not indeed other griefs, yet the causes of other griefs. For whence had that former grief so easily reached my very inmost soul, but that I had poured out my soul upon the dust, in loving one that must die, as if he would never die? For what restored and refreshed me chiefly was the solaces of other friends, with whom I did love, what instead of thee I loved, and this was a great fable and protracted lie, by whose adulterous stimulus our soul, which lay itching in our ears, was being defiled. But that fable would not die to me, so oft as any of my friends died. There were other things which in them did more take my mind, to talk and jest together, to do kind offices by turns, to read together honeyed books, to play the fool or be earnest together, to dissent at times without discontent, as a man might with his own self, and even with the seldomness of these dissentings, to season our more frequent consentings, sometimes to teach and sometimes learn, long for the absent with impatience, and welcome the coming with joy. These and the like expressions, proceeding out of the hearts of those that loved and were loved again, by the countenance, the tongue, the eyes, and 1,000 pleasing gestures, were so much fuel to melt our souls together, and out of many make but one. This is it that is loved in friends, and so loved that a man's conscience condemns itself, if he love not him that loves him again, or love not again him that loves him, looking for nothing from his person but indications of his love. Hence that mourning, if one die, and darkenings of sorrows, that steeping of the heart in tears, all sweetness turn to bitterness, and upon the loss of life of the dying, the death of the living. Blessed whoso loveth thee, and his friend in thee, and his enemy for thee. For he alone loses none dear to him, to whom all are dear in him who cannot be lost. And who is this but our God, the God that made heaven and earth, and filleth them, because by filling them he created them? Thee none loseth, but who leaveth? And who leaveth thee, whither goeth, or whither fleeth he? But from thee well pleased, to thee displeased. For where doth he not find thy law in his own punishment? And thy law is truth, and truth thou. Turn us, O God of hosts, show us thy countenance, and we shall be whole. For whithersoever the soul of man turns itself, unless toward thee, it is riveted upon sorrows, yea, though it is riveted on things beautiful. And yet they, out of thee, and out of the soul, were not, unless they were from thee. They rise and set, and by rising they begin as it were to be. They grow that they may be perfected, and perfected they wax old and wither, and all grow not old, but all wither. So then when they rise and tend to be, the more quickly they grow that they may be, so much the more they haste not to be. This is the law of them. Thus much hast thou allotted them, because they are portions of things, which exist not all at once, but by passing away and succeeding, they together complete that universe, whereof they are portions. And even thus is our speech completed by signs giving forth a sound, but this again is not perfected unless one word pass away when it hath sounded its part, that another may succeed. Out of all these things let my soul praise thee, O God, Creator of all. Yet let not my soul be riveted unto these things with the glue of love through the senses of the body. For they go whither they were to go, that they might not be, and they rend her with pestilent longings, because she longs to be, yet loves to repose in what she loves. But in these things is no place of repose. They abide not, they flee, and who can follow them with the senses of the flesh? Yea, who can grasp them when they are hard by? For the sense of the flesh is slow, because it is the sense of the flesh, and thereby is it bounded. It sufficeth for that it was made for, but it sufficeth not to stay things running their course from their appointed starting place to the end appointed. For in thy word, by which they are created, they hear their decree, hence and hitherto. Be not foolish, O my soul, nor become deaf in the ear of thine heart with the tumult of thy folly. Hearken thou too. The word itself calleth thee to return, and there is the place of rest imperturbable, where love is not forsaken if itself forsaketh not. Behold, these things pass away, that others may replace them, and so this lower universe be completed by all his parts. But do I depart any whither, saith the word of God? There fix thy dwelling, trust there whatsoever thou hast thence. O my soul, at least now thou art tired out with vanities. Entrust truth whatsoever thou hast from the truth, and thou shalt lose nothing, and thy decay shall bloom again, and all thy diseases be healed, and thy mortal parts be reformed and renewed and bound around thee. Nor shall they lay thee whither themselves descend, but they shall stand fast with thee, and abide for ever before God, who abideth and standeth fast for ever. Why then be perverted, and follow thy flesh? Be it converted, and follow thee. Whatever by her thou hast sense of is in part, and the whole, whereof these are parts, thou knowest not, and yet they delight thee. But had the sense of thy flesh a capacity for comprehending the whole, and not itself also, for thy punishment, been justly restricted to a part of the whole, thou wouldest that whatsoever existeth at this present should pass away, that so the whole might better please thee. For what we speak also, by the same sense of the flesh thou hearest, yet wouldest not thou have the syllables stay, but fly away, that others may come, and thou hear the whole. And so ever, when any one thing is made up of many, all of which do not exist together, all collectively would please more than they do severally, could all be perceived collectively. But far better than these is he who made all, and he is our God, nor doth he pass away, for neither doth aught succeed him. If bodies please thee, praise God on occasion of them, and turn back thy love upon their Maker, lest in these things which please thee thou displease. If souls please thee, be they loved in God, for they too are mutable, but in him are they firmly stablished, else would they pass and pass away. In him then be they beloved, and carry unto him along with thee what souls thou canst, and say to them, Him let us love, him let us love. He made these, nor is he far off. For he did not make them, and so depart, but they are of him, and in him. See, there he is, where truth is loved. He is within the very heart, yet hath the heart strayed from him. Go back into your heart, ye transgressors, and cleave fast to him that made you. Stand with him, and ye shall stand fast. Rest in him, and ye shall be at rest. Whither go ye in rough ways? Whither go ye? The good that you love is from him, but it is good and pleasant through reference to him, and justly shall it be embittered, because unjustly is anything loved which is from him, if he be forsaken for it. To what end, then, would ye still and still walk these difficult and toilsome ways? There is no rest where ye seek it. Seek what ye seek, but it is not there where ye seek. Ye seek a blessed life in the land of death. It is not there. For how should there be a blessed life where life itself is not? But our true life came down hither, and bore our death, and slew him, out of the abundance of his own life, and he thundered, calling aloud to us to return hence to him into that secret place, whence he came forth to us, first into the Virgin's womb, wherein he espoused the human creation, our mortal flesh, that it might not be for ever mortal, and thence like a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, rejoicing as a giant to run his course, for he lingered not, but ran, calling aloud by words, deeds, death, life, descent, ascension, crying aloud to us to return unto him. And he departed from our eyes, that we might return into our heart, and there find him. For he departed, and lo, he is here. He would not be long with us, yet left us not. For he departed thither, whence he never parted, because the world was made by him. And in this world he was, and into this world he came to save sinners, unto whom my soul confesseth, and he healeth it, for it hath sinned against him. O ye sons of men, how long so slow of heart? Even now, after the descent of life to you, will ye not ascend and live? But whither ascend ye, when ye are on high, and set your mouth against the heavens? Descend that ye may ascend, and ascend to God, for ye have fallen by ascending against him. Tell them this, that they may weep in the valley of tears, and so carry them up with thee unto God, because out of his Spirit thou speakest thus unto them, if thou speakest, burning with the fire of charity. These things I then knew not, and I loved these lower beauties, and I was sinking to the very depths, and to my friends I said, Do we love anything but the beautiful? What then is the beautiful? And what is beauty? What is it that attracts and wins us to the things we love? For unless there were in them a grace and beauty, they could by no means draw us unto them. And I marked and perceived that in bodies themselves there was a beauty, from their forming a sort of whole, and again another from apt and mutual correspondence, as of a part of the body with its whole, or a shoe with a foot, and the like. And this consideration sprang up in my mind, out of my inmost heart, and I wrote, On the Fair and Fit, I think, 2 or 3 books. Thou knowest, O Lord, for it is gone from me, for I have them not, but they are strayed from me, I know not how. But what moved me, O Lord my God, to dedicate these books unto Herius, an orator of Rome, whom I knew not by face, but loved for the fame of his learning, which was eminent in him, and some words of his I had heard, which pleased me. But more did he please me, for that he pleased others, who highly extolled him, amazed that out of a Syrian, first instructed in Greek eloquence, should afterwards be formed a wonderful Latin orator, and one most learned in things pertaining unto philosophy. One is commended, and, unseen, he is loved. Doth this love enter the heart of the hearer from the mouth of the commender? Not so, but by one who loveth is another kindled. For hence he is loved who is commended, when the commender is believed to extol him with an unfeigned heart, that is, when one that loves him praises him. For so did I then love men, upon the judgment of men, not thine, O my God, in whom no man is deceived. But yet why not for qualities, like those of a famous charioteer, or fighter with beasts in the theatre, known far and wide by a vulgar popularity, but far otherwise, and earnestly, and so as I would be myself commended? For I would not be commended or loved as actors are, though I myself did commend and love them, but had rather be unknown than so known, and even hated than so loved. Where now are the impulses to such various and divers kinds of loves laid up in one soul? Why, since we are equally men, do I love in another? What, if I did not hate, I should not spurn and cast from myself? For it holds not that as a good horse is loved by him, who would not, though he might, be that horse? Therefore the same may be said of an actor who shares our nature. Do I then love in a man what I hate to be, who am a man? Man himself is a great deep, whose very hairs thou numberest, O Lord, and they fall not to the ground without thee. And yet are the hairs of his head easier to be numbered than his feelings, and the beatings of his heart. But that orator was of that sort whom I loved, as wishing to be myself such, and I erred through a swelling pride, and was tossed about with every wind, but yet was steered by thee, though very secretly. And whence do I know, and whence do I confidently confess unto thee, that I had loved him more for the love of his commenders than for the very things for which he was commended? Because had he been unpraised, and these self-same men had dispraised him, and with dispraise and contempt told the very same things of him, I had never been so kindled and excited to love him. And yet the things had not been other, nor he himself other, but only the feelings of the relators. See where the impotent soul lies along, that is not yet stayed up by the solidity of truth. Just as the gales of tongues blow from the breast of the opinionative, so is it carried this way and that, driven forward and backward, and the light is overclouded to it, and the truth unseen. And lo, it is before us. And it was to me a great matter that my discourse and labours should be known to that man, which should he approve, I were the more kindled, but if he disapproved, my empty heart, void of thy solidity, had been wounded. And yet the fair and fit, whereon I wrote to him, I dwelt on with pleasure, and surveyed it, and admired it, though none joined therein. But I saw not yet, whereon this weighty matter turned in thy wisdom, O thou omnipotent, who only doest wonders, and my mind ranged through corporeal forms, and, fair, I defined and distinguished what is so in itself, and fit, whose beauty is in correspondence to some other thing, and this I supported by corporeal examples. And I turned to the nature of the mind, but the false notion which I had of spiritual things let me not see the truth. Yet the force of truth did of itself flash into mine eyes, and I turned away my panting soul from incorporeal substance to lineaments and colours and bulky magnitudes. And not being able to see these in the mind, I thought I could not see my mind. And whereas in virtue I loved peace, and in viciousness I abhorred discord, in the first I observed a unity, but in the other a sort of division. And in that unity I conceived the rational soul, and the nature of truth, and of the chief good to consist. But in this division I miserably imagined there to be some unknown substance of irrational life, and the nature of the chief evil, which should not only be a substance, but real life also, and yet not derived from thee, O my God, of whom are all things. And yet that first I called a monad, as it had been a soul without sex, but the latter a duad, anger, in deeds of violence, and in flagitiousness, lust, not knowing whereof I spake. For I had not known or learned that neither was evil a substance, nor our soul that chief and unchangeable good. For as deeds of violence arise, if that emotion of the soul be corrupted, whence vehement action springs, stirring itself insolently and unrulily, and lusts, when that affection of the soul is ungoverned, whereby carnal pleasures are drunk in, so do errors and false opinions defile the conversation, if the reasonable soul itself be corrupted. As it was then in me, who knew not that it must be enlightened by another light, that it may be partaker of truth, seeing itself is not that nature of truth. For thou shalt light my candle, O Lord my God, thou shalt enlighten my darkness, and of thy fullness have we all received, for thou art the true light that lighteth every man that cometh into the world. For in thee there is no variableness, neither shadow of change. But I pressed towards thee, and was thrust from thee, that I might taste of death, for thou resistest the proud. But what prouder than for me with a strange madness to maintain myself to be that by nature which thou art? For whereas I was subject to change, so much being manifest to me, my very desire to become wise, being the wish of worse to become better, yet chose I rather to imagine thee subject to change, and myself not to be that which thou art. Therefore I was repelled by thee, and thou resistedst my vain stiff-neckedness, and I imagined corporeal forms, and myself flesh, I accused flesh, and a wind that passeth away, I returned not to thee, but I passed on and on to things which have no being, neither in thee, nor in me, nor in the body. Neither were they created for me by thy truth, but by my vanity devised out of things corporeal. And I was wont to ask thy faithful little ones, my fellow citizens, from whom, unknown to myself, I stood exiled. I was wont, prating and foolishly, to ask them, why then doth the soul err which God created? But I would not be asked, why then doth God err? And I maintain that thy unchangeable substance did err upon constraint, rather than confess that my changeable substance had gone astray voluntarily, and now, in punishment, lay in error. I was then some 6 or 7 and 20 years old when I wrote those volumes, revolving within me corporeal fictions, buzzing in the ears of my heart, which I turned, O sweet truth, to thy inward melody, meditating on the fair and fit, and longing to stand and hearken to thee, and to rejoice greatly at the bridegroom's voice, but could not. For by the voices of mine own errors I was hurried abroad, and through the weight of my own pride I was sinking into the lowest pit. For thou didst not make me to hear joy and gladness, nor did the bones exult which were not yet humbled. And what did it profit me, that scarce 20 years old, a book of Aristotle, which they call the 10 Predicaments, falling into my hands, on whose very name I hung as on something great and divine, so often as my rhetoric master of Carthage, and others, accounted learned, mouthed it with cheeks bursting with pride, I read and understood it unaided. And on my conferring with others, who said that they scarcely understood it, with very able tutors, not only orally explaining it, but drawing many things in sand, they could tell me no more of it than I had learned, reading it by myself. And the book appeared to me to speak very clearly of substances, such as man, and of their qualities, as the figure of a man, of what sort it is, and stature, how many feet high, and his relationship, whose brother he is, or where placed, or when born, or whether he stands or sits, or be shod or armed, or does or suffers anything, and all the innumerable things which might be ranged under these 9 predicaments, of which I have given some specimens, or under that chief predicament of substance. What did all this further me, seeing it even hindered me? When, imagining whatever was comprehended under those 10 predicaments, I essayed in such wise to understand, O my God, thy wonderful and unchangeable unity also, as if thou also hadst been subjected to thine own greatness or beauty, so that, as in bodies, they should exist in thee, as their subject, whereas thou thyself art thy greatness and beauty. But a body is not great or fair in that it is a body, seeing that, though it were less great or fair, it should notwithstanding be a body. But it was falsehood which of thee I conceived, not truth, fictions of my misery, not the realities of thy blessedness. For thou hadst commanded, and it was done in me, that the earth should bring forth briars and thorns to me, and that in the sweat of my brows I should eat my bread. And what did it profit me, that all the books I could procure of the so-called liberal arts, I, the vile slave of vile affections, read by myself and understood? And I delighted in them, but knew not whence came all, that therein was true or certain. For I had my back to the light, and my face to the things enlightened. Whence my face, with which I discerned the things enlightened, itself was not enlightened. Whatever was written, either on rhetoric or logic, geometry, music, and arithmetic, by myself without much difficulty or any instructor, I understood, thou knowest, O Lord my God, because both quickness of understanding and acuteness in discerning is thy gift. Yet did I not thence sacrifice to thee. So then it served not to my use, but rather to my perdition, since I went about to get so good a portion of my substance into my own keeping, and I kept not my strength for thee, but wandered from thee into a far country, to spend it upon harlotries. For what profited me good abilities, not employed to good uses? For I felt not that those arts were attained with great difficulty, even by the studious and talented, until I attempted to explain them to such, when he most excelled in them who followed me not altogether slowly. But what did this further me, imagining that thou, O Lord God, the truth, wert a vast and bright body, and I a fragment of that body? Perverseness too great. But such was I. Nor do I blush, O my God, to confess to thee thy mercies towards me, and to call upon thee, who blushed not then to profess to men my blasphemies, and to bark against thee. What profited me then my nimble wit in those sciences, and all those most knotty volumes, unravelled by me, without aid from human instruction? Seeing I erred so foully, and with such sacrilegious shamefulness in the doctrine of piety? Or what hindrance was a far slower wit to thy little ones, since they departed not far from thee, that in the nest of thy church they might securely be fledged, and nourish the wings of charity by the food of a sound faith? O Lord our God, under the shadow of thy wings let us hope. Protect us, and carry us. Thou wilt carry us both when little, and even to hoar hairs wilt thou carry us. For our firmness, when it is thou, then is it firmness. But when our own, it is infirmity. Our good ever lives with thee, from which when we turn away, we are turned aside. Let us now, O Lord, return, that we may not be overturned, because with thee our good lives without any decay, which good art thou. Nor need we fear, lest there be no place whither to return, because we fell from it. For through our absence our mansion fell not, thy eternity. Book 5. Accept the sacrifice of my confessions from the ministry of my tongue, which thou hast formed and stirred up to confess unto thy name. Heal thou all my bones, and let them say, O Lord, who is like unto thee? For he who confesses to thee doth not teach thee what takes place within him. Seeing a closed heart closes not out thy eye, nor can man's hard-heartedness thrust back thy hand, for thou dissolvest it at thy will in pity or in vengeance, and nothing can hide itself from thy heat. But let my soul praise thee, that it may love thee, and let it confess thy own mercies to thee, that it may praise thee. Thy whole creation ceaseth not, nor is silent in thy praises. Neither the spirit of man with voice directed unto thee, nor creation animate or inanimate by the voice of those who meditate thereon, that so our souls may from their weariness arise towards thee, leaning on those things which thou hast created, and passing on to thyself, who madest them wonderfully, and there is refreshment and true strength. Let the restless, the godless, depart and flee from thee, yet thou seest them and dividest the darkness. And behold, the universe with them is fair, though they are foul. And how have they injured thee? Or how have they disgraced thy government, which, from the heaven to this lowest earth, is just and perfect? For whither fled they, when they fled from thy presence? Or where dost not thou find them? But they fled, that they might not see thee seeing them, and blinded might stumble against thee, because thou forsakest nothing thou hast made, that the unjust, I say, might stumble upon thee, and justly be hurt, withdrawing themselves from thy gentleness, and stumbling at thy uprightness, and falling upon their own ruggedness. Ignorant, in truth, that thou art everywhere, whom no place encompasseth, and thou alone art near, even to those that remove far from thee. Let them then be turned and seek thee, because not as they have forsaken their Creator hast thou forsaken thy creation. Let them be turned and seek thee, and behold, thou art there in their heart, in the heart of those that confess to thee, and cast themselves upon thee, and weep in thy bosom after all their rugged ways. Then dost thou gently wipe away their tears, and they weep the more, and joy in weeping. Even for that thou, Lord, not man of flesh and blood, but thou, Lord, who madest them, remakest and comfortest them. But where was I, when I was seeking thee? And thou wert before me, but I had gone away from thee, nor did I find myself, how much less thee? I would lay open before my God that 19th year of mine age. There had then come to Carthage a certain bishop of the Manichees, Faustus by name, a great snare of the devil, and many were entangled by him through that lure of his smooth language, which though I did commend, yet could I separate from the truth of the things which I was earnest to learn. Nor did I so much regard the service of oratory as the science which this Faustus, so praised among them, set before me to feed upon. Fame had before bespoken him most knowing in all valuable learning, and exquisitely skilled in the liberal sciences. And since I had read and well remembered much of the philosophers, I compared some things of theirs with those long fables of the Manichees, and found the former the more probable. Even although they could only prevail so far as to make judgment of this lower world, the Lord of it they could by no means find out. For thou art great, O Lord, and hast respect unto the humble, but the proud thou beholdest afar off. Nor dost thou draw near, but to the contrite in heart, nor art found by the proud. No, not though by curious skill they could number the stars and the sand, and measure the starry heavens, and track the courses of the planets. For with their understanding and wit, which thou bestowedst on them, they search out these things, and much have they found out, and foretold, many years before, eclipses of those luminaries, the sun and moon, what day and hour, and how many digits. Nor did their calculation fail. And it came to pass as they foretold, and they wrote down the rules they had found out, and these are read at this day, and out of them do others foretell in what year and month of the year, and what day of the month, and what hour of the day, and what part of its light, moon, or sun is to be eclipsed, and so it shall be, as it is foreshowed. At these things men that know not this art marvel and are astonished, and they that know it exult and are puffed up, and by an ungodly pride departing from thee, and failing of thy light, they foresee a failure of the sun's light, which shall be so long before, but see not their own, which is. For they search not religiously whence they have the wit, wherewith they search out this. And finding that thou madest them, they give not themselves up to thee, to preserve what thou madest, nor sacrifice to thee what they have made themselves, nor slay their own soaring imaginations, as fowls of the air, nor their own diving curiosities, wherewith, like the fishes of the sea, they wander over the unknown paths of the abyss, nor their own luxuriousness, as beasts of the field, that thou, Lord, a consuming fire, mayest burn up those dead cares of theirs, and recreate themselves immortally. But they knew not the way, thy word, by whom thou madest these things which they number, and themselves who number, and the sense whereby they perceive what they number, and the understanding out of which they number, or that of thy wisdom there is no number. But the only begotten is himself made unto us wisdom, and righteousness, and sanctification, and was numbered among us, and paid tribute unto Caesar. They knew not this way whereby to descend to him from themselves, and by him ascend unto him. They knew not this way, and deemed themselves exalted amongst the stars and shining. And behold, they fell upon the earth, and their foolish heart was darkened. They discourse many things truly concerning the creature, but truth, artificer of the creature, they seek not piously, and therefore find him not. Or if they find him, knowing him to be God, they glorify him not as God, neither are thankful, but become vain in their imaginations, and profess themselves to be wise, attributing to themselves what is thine, and thereby with most perverse blindness study to impute to thee what is their own, forging lies of thee who art the truth, and changing the glory of uncorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and to birds, and four-footed beasts, and creeping things, changing thy truth into a lie, and worshipping and serving the creature more than the Creator. Yet many truths concerning the creature retained I from these men, and saw the reason thereof from calculations, the succession of times, and the visible testimonies of the stars, and compared them with the saying of Manichaeus, which in his frenzy he had written most largely on these subjects, but discovered not any account of the solstices or equinoxes, or the eclipses of the greater lights, nor whatever of this sort I had learned in the books of secular philosophy. But I was commanded to believe, and yet it corresponded not with what had been established by calculations and my own sight, but was quite contrary. Doth then, O Lord God of truth, whoso knoweth these things, therefore please thee? Surely unhappy is he who knoweth all these, and knoweth not thee, but happy whoso knoweth thee, though he know not these. And whoso knoweth both thee and them is not the happier for them, but for thee only, if, knowing thee, he glorifies thee as God, and is thankful, and becomes not vain in his imaginations. For as he is better off who knows how to possess a tree, and return thanks to thee for the use thereof, although he know not how many cubits high it is, or how wide it spreads, than he that can measure it, and count all its boughs, and neither owns it, nor knows or loves its Creator. So a believer, whose all this world of wealth is, and who having nothing, yet possesseth all things, by cleaving unto thee, whom all things serve, though he know not even the circles of the Great Bear, yet is it folly to doubt, but he is in a better state than one who can measure the heavens, and number the stars, and poise the elements, yet neglecteth thee, who hast made all things in number, weight, and measure. But yet, who bade that Manichaeus write on these things also, skill in which was no element of piety? For thou hast said to man, Behold piety and wisdom, of which he might be ignorant, though he had perfect knowledge of these things. But these things, since, knowing not, he most impudently dared to teach, he plainly could have no knowledge of piety. For it is vanity to make profession of these worldly things, even when known, but confession to thee is piety. Wherefore this wanderer to this end spake much of these things, that convicted by those who had truly learned them, it might be manifest what understanding he had in the other abstruser things. For he would not have himself meanly thought of, but went about to persuade men that the Holy Ghost, the Comforter and Enricher of thy faithful ones, was with plenary authority personally within him. When then he was found out to have taught falsely of the heaven and stars, and of the motions of the sun and moon, although these things pertain not to the doctrine of religion, yet his sacrilegious presumption would become evident enough, seeing he delivered things which not only he knew not, but which were falsified, with so mad a vanity of pride that he sought to ascribe them to himself as to a divine person. For when I hear any Christian brother ignorant of these things, and mistaken on them, I can patiently behold such a man holding his opinion. Nor do I see that any ignorance as to the position or character of the corporeal creation can injure him, so long as he doth not believe anything unworthy of thee, O Lord, the Creator of all. But it doth injure him if he imagine it to pertain to the form of the doctrine of piety, and will yet affirm that too stiffly whereof he is ignorant. And yet is even such an infirmity in the infancy of faith, borne by our mother Charity, till the newborn may grow up unto a perfect man, so as not to be carried about with every wind of doctrine, but in him who in such wise presumed to be the teacher, source, guide, chief of all whom he could so persuade, that whoso followed him thought that he followed, not a mere man, but thy Holy Spirit, who would not judge that so great madness, when once convicted of having taught anything false, were to be detested and utterly rejected. But I had not as yet clearly ascertained whether the vicissitudes of longer and shorter days and nights, and of day and night itself, with the eclipses of the greater lights, and whatever else of the kind I had read of in other books, might be explained consistently with his sayings, so that, if they by any means might, it should still remain a question to me whether it were so or no, but I might, on account of his reputed sanctity, rest my credence upon his authority. And for almost all those 9 years, wherein with unsettled mind I had been their disciple, I had longed but too intensely for the coming of this Faustus. For the rest of the sect, whom by chance I had lighted upon when unable to solve my objections about these things, still held out to me the coming of this Faustus, by conference with whom these and greater difficulties, if I had them, were to be most readily and abundantly cleared. When then he came, I found him a man of pleasing discourse, and who could speak fluently and in better terms, yet still but the self-same things which they were wont to say. But what availed the utmost neatness of the cupbearer to my thirst for a more precious draught? Mine ears were already cloyed with the like, nor did they seem to me therefore better, because better said, nor therefore true, because eloquent, nor the soul therefore wise, because the face was comely, and the language graceful. But they who held him out to me were no good judges of things, and therefore to them he appeared understanding and wise, because in words pleasing. I felt, however, that another sort of people were suspicious even of truth, and refused to assent to it, if delivered in a smooth and copious discourse. But thou, O my God, hadst already taught me by wonderful and secret ways, and therefore I believe that thou taughtest me, because it is truth, nor is there besides thee any teacher of truth, where or whencesoever it may shine upon us. Of thyself, therefore, had I now learned that neither ought anything to seem to be spoken truly, because eloquently, nor therefore falsely, because the utterance of the lips is inharmonious, nor, again, therefore true, because rudely delivered, nor therefore false, because the language is rich, but that wisdom and folly are as wholesome and unwholesome food, and adorned or unadorned phrases as courtly or country vessels. Either kind of meats may be served up in either kind of dishes. That greediness, then, wherewith I had of so long time expected that man, was delighted verily with his action and feeling when disputing, and his choice and readiness of words to clothe his ideas. I was then delighted, and with many others, and more than they, did I praise and extol him. It troubled me, however, that in the assembly of his auditors I was not allowed to put in and communicate those questions that troubled me in familiar converse with him, which, when I might, and with my friends, began to engage his ears at such times as it was not unbecoming for him to discuss with me, and had brought forward such things as moved me. I found him first utterly ignorant of liberal sciences, save grammar, and that but in an ordinary way. But because he had read some of Tully's orations, a very few books of Seneca, some things of the poets, and such few volumes of his own sect as were written in Latin and neatly, and was daily practised in speaking, he acquired a certain eloquence, which proved the more pleasing and seductive, because under the guidance of a good wit, and with a kind of natural gracefulness. Is it not thus, as I recall it, O Lord my God, thou judge of my conscience? Before thee is my heart and my remembrance, who didst at that time direct me by the hidden mystery of thy providence, and didst set those shameful errors of mine before my face, that I might see and hate them. For after it was clear that he was ignorant of those arts in which I thought he excelled, I began to despair of his opening and solving the difficulties which perplexed me, of which indeed, however ignorant, he might have held the truths of piety, had he not been a Manichee. For their books are fraught with prolix fables of the heaven and stars, sun and moon, and I now no longer thought him able satisfactorily to decide what I much desired, whether, on comparison of these things with the calculations I had elsewhere read, the account given in the books of Manichaeus were preferable, or at least as good. Which, when I proposed to be considered and discussed, he, so far modestly, shrunk from the burthen, for he knew that he knew not these things, and was not ashamed to confess it. For he was not one of those talking persons, many of whom I had endured, who undertook to teach me these things, and said nothing. But this man had a heart, though not right towards thee, yet neither altogether treacherous to himself. For he was not altogether ignorant of his own ignorance, nor would he rashly be entangled in a dispute whence he could neither retreat nor extricate himself fairly. Even for this I liked him the better. For fairer is the modesty of a candid mind than the knowledge of those things which I desired, and such I found him in all the more difficult and subtile questions. My zeal for the writings of Manichaeus being thus blunted, and despairing yet more of their other teachers, seeing that in divers things which perplexed me, he, so renowned among them, had so turned out, I began to engage with him in the study of that literature, on which he also was much set, and which as rhetoric reader I was at that time teaching young students at Carthage, and to read with him either what himself desired to hear, or such as I judged fit for his genius. But all my efforts whereby I had purposed to advance in that sect upon knowledge of that man came utterly to an end. Not that I detached myself from them altogether, but as one finding nothing better, I had settled to be content meanwhile with what I had in whatever way fallen upon, unless by chance something more eligible should dawn upon me. Thus, that Faustus, to so many a snare of death, had now neither willing nor witting it, begun to loosen that wherein I was taken. For thy hands, O my God, in the secret purpose of thy providence, did not forsake my soul. And out of my mother's heart's blood, through her tears night and day poured out, was a sacrifice offered for me unto thee. And thou didst deal with me by wondrous ways. Thou didst it, O my God, for the steps of a man are ordered by the Lord, and he shall dispose his way. Or how shall we obtain salvation, but from thy hand, remaking what it made? Thou didst deal with me, that I should be persuaded to go to Rome, and to teach there rather what I was teaching at Carthage. And how I was persuaded to this I will not neglect to confess to thee, because herein also the deepest recesses of thy wisdom and thy most present mercy to us must be considered and confessed. I did not wish therefore to go to Rome, because higher gains and higher dignities were warranted me by my friends who persuaded me to this, though even these things had at that time an influence over my mind. But my chief and almost only reason was that I heard that young men studied there more peacefully, and were kept quiet under a restraint of more regular discipline, so that they did not, at their pleasures, petulantly rush into the school of one whose pupils they were not, nor were even admitted without his permission. Whereas at Carthage there reigns among the scholars a most disgraceful and unruly license. They burst in audaciously, and with gestures almost frantic, disturb all order which anyone hath established for the good of his scholars. Divers outrages they commit, with a wonderful stolidity, punishable by law, did not custom uphold them. That custom evincing them to be the more miserable, in that they now do as lawful what by thy eternal law shall never be lawful, and they think they do it unpunished, whereas they are punished with the very blindness whereby they do it, and suffer incomparably worse than what they do. The manners then, which, when a student, I would not make my own, I was fain as a teacher to endure in others, and so I was well pleased to go where all that knew it assured me that the like was not done. But thou, my refuge, and my portion in the land of the living, that I might change my earthly dwelling for the salvation of my soul, at Carthage didst goad me, that I might thereby be torn from it. and at Rome didst proffer me allurements whereby I might be drawn thither by men in love with a dying life, the one doing frantic, the other promising vain things, and to correct my steps did secretly use their and my own perverseness. For both they who disturbed my quiet were blinded with a disgraceful frenzy, and they who invited me elsewhere savoured of earth. And I, who here detested real misery, was there seeking unreal happiness. But why I went hence, and went thither, thou knewest, O God, yet showedst it neither to me nor to my mother, who grievously bewailed my journey, and followed me as far as the sea. But I deceived her, holding me by force, that either she might keep me back or go with me, and I feigned that I had a friend whom I could not leave till he had a fair wind to sail. And I lied to my mother, and such a mother, and escaped. For this also hast thou mercifully forgiven me, preserving me, thus full of execrable defilements, from the waters of the sea, for the water of thy grace, whereby, when I was cleansed, the streams of my mother's eyes should be dried, with which for me she daily watered the ground under her face. And yet refusing to return without me, I scarcely persuaded her to stay that night in a place hard by our ship, where was an oratory in memory of the blessed Cyprian. That night I privily departed, but she was not behind in weeping and prayer. And what, O Lord, was she with so many tears asking of thee, but that thou wouldest not suffer me to sail? But thou, in the depth of thy counsels, and hearing the main point of her desire, regardest not what she then asked, that thou mightest make me what she ever asked. The wind blew and swelled our sails, and withdrew the shore from our sight. And she on the morrow was there, frantic with sorrow, and with complaints and groans filled thine ears, who didst then disregard them, whilst through my desires thou wert hurrying me to end all desire, and the earthly part of her affection to me was chastened by the allotted scourge of sorrows. For she loved my being with her, as mothers do, but much more than many, and she knew not how great joy thou wert about to work for her out of my absence. She knew not, therefore did she weep and wail, and by this agony there appeared in her the inheritance of Eve, with sorrow seeking what in sorrow she had brought forth. And yet, after accusing my treachery and hard-heartedness, she betook herself again to intercede to thee for me, went to her wonted place, and I to Rome. And lo, there was I received by the scourge of bodily sickness, and I was going down to hell, carrying all the sins which I had committed, both against thee and myself and others, many and grievous, over and above that bond of original sin, whereby we all die in Adam. For thou hadst not forgiven me any of these things in Christ, nor had he abolished by his cross the enmity which by my sins I had incurred with thee. For how should he by the crucifixion of a phantasm, which I believed him to be? So true, then, was the death of my soul, as that of his flesh seemed to me false, and how true the death of his body, so false was the life of my soul, which did not believe it. And now the fever heightening, I was parting and departing forever. For had I then parted hence, whither had I departed, but into fire and torments, such as my misdeeds deserved in the truth of thy appointment? And this she knew not, yet in absence prayed for me. But thou, everywhere present, heardest her where she was, and where I was, hadst compassion upon me, that I should recover the health of my body, though frenzied as yet in my sacrilegious heart. For I did not in all that danger desire thy baptism, and I was better as a boy, when I begged it of my mother's piety, as I have before recited and confessed. But I had grown up to my own shame, and I madly scoffed at the prescripts of thy medicine, who wouldest not suffer me, being such, to die a double death. With which wound had my mother's heart been pierced, it could never be healed. For I cannot express the affection she bore to me, and with how much more vehement anguish she was now in labour of me in the spirit, than at her childbearing in the flesh. I see not then how she should have been healed, had such a death of mine stricken through the bowels of her love. And where would have been those her so strong and unceasing prayers, unintermitting to thee alone? But wouldest thou, God of mercies, despise the contrite and humbled heart of that chaste and sober widow, so frequent in alms deeds, so full of duty and service to thy saints, no day intermitting the oblation at thine altar, twice a day, morning and evening, without any intermission, coming to thy church, not for idle tattlings and old wives' fables, but that she might hear thee in thy discourses, and thou her in her prayers. Couldest thou despise and reject from thy aid the tears of such an one, wherewith she begged of thee not gold or silver, nor any mutable or passing good, but the salvation of her son's soul, thou, by whose gift she was such? Never, Lord. Yea, thou wert at hand, and wert hearing and doing, in that order wherein thou hadst determined before that it should be done. Far be it that thou shouldest deceive her in thy visions and answers, some whereof I have, some I have not mentioned, which she laid up in her faithful heart, and ever praying, urged upon thee, as thine own handwriting. For thou, because thy mercy endureth forever, vouchsafest to those to whom thou forgivest all of their debts, to become also a debtor by thy promises. Thou recoveredst me then of that sickness, and healedst the son of thy handmaid, for the time in body, that he might live, for thee to bestow upon him a better and more abiding health. And even then, at Rome, I joined myself to those deceiving and deceived holy ones, not with their disciples only, of which number was he, in whose house I had fallen sick and recovered, but also with those whom they call the elect. For I still thought that it was not we that sin, but that I know not what other nature sinned in us, and it delighted my pride to be free from blame, and when I had done any evil, not to confess I had done any, that thou mightest heal my soul because it had sinned against thee. But I loved to excuse it, and to accuse I know not what other thing, which was with me, but which I was not. But in truth it was wholly I, and mine impiety had divided me against myself, and that sin was the more incurable, whereby I did not judge myself a sinner, and execrable iniquity it was, that I had rather have thee, O God Almighty, to be overcome in me to my destruction, than myself of thee to salvation. Not as yet then hadst thou set a watch before my mouth, and a door of safe keeping around my lips, that my heart might not turn aside to wicked speeches, to make excuses of sins, with men that work iniquity, and therefore was I still united with their elect. But now, despairing to make proficiency in that false doctrine, even those things with which, if I should find no better, I had resolved to rest contented, I now held more laxly and carelessly. For there half arose a thought in me that those philosophers, whom they call academics, were wiser than the rest, for that they held men ought to doubt everything, and laid down that no truth can be comprehended by man. For so, not then understanding even their meaning, I also was clearly convinced that they thought, as they are commonly reported. Yet did I freely and openly discourage that host of mine from that overconfidence which I perceived him to have in those fables, which the books of Manichaeus are full of. Yet I lived in more familiar friendship with them than with others who were not of this heresy, nor did I maintain it with my ancient eagerness. Still my intimacy with that sect, Rome secretly harbouring many of them, made me slower to seek any other way, especially since I despaired of finding the truth from which they had turned me aside in thy church, O Lord of heaven and earth, creator of all things visible and invisible, and it seemed to me very unseemly to believe thee to have the shape of human flesh, and to be bounded by the bodily lineaments of our members. And because, when I wished to think on my God, I knew not what to think of, but a mass of bodies, for what was not such did not seem to me to be anything, this was the greatest and almost only cause of my inevitable error. For hence I believed evil also to be some such kind of substance, and to have its own foul and hideous bulk, whether gross, which they called earth, or thin and subtile, like the body of the air, which they imagined to be some malignant mind creeping through that earth. And because a piety, such as it was, constrained me to believe that the good God never created any evil nature, I conceived two masses, contrary to one another, both unbounded, but the evil narrower, the good more expansive. And from this pestilent beginning, the other sacrilegious conceits followed on me. For when my mind endeavoured to recur to the Catholic faith, I was driven back, since that was not the Catholic faith which I thought to be so. and I seemed to myself more reverential if I believed of thee, my God, to whom thy mercies confess out of my mouth, as unbounded, at least on other sides, although on that one where the mass of evil was opposed to thee, I was constrained to confess thee bounded, than if on all sides I should imagine thee to be bounded by the form of a human body. And it seemed to me better to believe thee to have created no evil, which to me ignorant seemed not some only, but a bodily substance, because I could not conceive of mind unless as a subtle body, and that diffused in definite spaces, than to believe the nature of evil, such as I conceived it, could come from thee. Yea, and our Saviour himself, thy only begotten, I believe to have been reached forth, as it were, for our salvation, out of the mass of thy most lucid substance, so as to believe nothing of him, but what I could imagine in my vanity. His nature, then, being such, I thought could not be born of the Virgin Mary, without being mingled with the flesh, and how that which I had so figured to myself could be mingled and not defiled, I saw not. I feared therefore to believe him born in the flesh, lest I should be forced to believe him defiled by the flesh. Now will thy spiritual ones mildly and lovingly smile upon me, if they shall read these my confessions. Yet such was I. Furthermore, what the Manichees had criticized in thy scriptures, I thought could not be defended. Yet at times, verily, I had a wish to confer upon these several points with someone very well skilled in those books, and to make trial what he thought thereon. For the words of one Helpidius, as he spoke and disputed face to face against the said Manichees, had begun to stir me even at Carthage, in that he had produced things out of the scriptures not easily withstood, the Manichees' answer whereto seemed to me weak, and this answer they liked not to give publicly, but only to us in private. It was that the scriptures of the New Testament had been corrupted by I know not whom, who wished to engraft the law of the Jews upon the Christian faith, yet themselves produced not any uncorrupted copies. But I, conceiving of things corporeal only, was mainly held down, vehemently oppressed, and in a manner suffocated by those masses, panting under which, after the breath of thy truth, I could not breathe it pure and untainted. I began then diligently to practice that for which I came to Rome, to teach rhetoric, and first to gather some to my house, to whom and through whom I had begun to be known. When, lo, I found other offences committed in Rome, to which I was not exposed in Africa. True, those subvertings by profligate young men were not here practised, as was told me, but on a sudden, said they, to avoid paying their master's stipend, a number of youths plot together and remove to another, breakers of faith who for love of money hold justice cheap. These also my heart hated, though not with a perfect hatred, for perchance I hated them more because I was to suffer by them than because they did things utterly unlawful. Of a truth, such are base persons, and they go a whoring from thee, loving these fleeting mockeries of things temporal, and filthy lucre, which fouls the hand that grasps it, hugging the fleeting world, and despising thee, who abidest, and recallest, and forgivest the adulterous soul of man, when she returns to thee. And now I hate such depraved and crooked persons, though I love them if corrigible, so as to prefer to money the learning which they acquire, and to learning thee, O God, the truth and fullness of assured good and most pure peace. But then I rather, for my own sake, mislike them evil, than liked and wished them good for thine. When therefore they of Milan had sent to Rome to the prefect of the city, to furnish them with a rhetoric reader for their city, and sent him at the public expense, I made application, through those very persons, intoxicated with Manichaean vanities, to be freed wherefrom I was to go, neither of us, however, knowing it, that Symmachus, then prefect of the city, would try me by setting me some subject, and so send me. To Milan I came, to Ambrose the bishop, known to the whole world as among the best of men, thy devout servant, whose eloquent discourse did then plentifully dispense unto thy people the flour of thy wheat, the gladness of thy oil, and the sober inebriation of thy wine. To him was I unknowing led by thee, that by him I might knowingly be led to thee. That man of God received me as a father, and showed me an episcopal kindness on my coming. Thenceforth I began to love him, at first indeed not as a teacher of the truth, which I utterly despaired of in thy church, but as a person kind towards myself. And I listened diligently to him preaching to the people, not with that intent I ought, but, as it were, trying his eloquence, whether it answered the fame thereof, or flowed fuller or lower than was reported. And I hung on his words attentively, but of the matter I was as a careless and scornful looker-on, and I was delighted with the sweetness of his discourse, more recondite, yet in manner less winning and harmonious than that of Faustus. Of the matter, however, there was no comparison, for the one was wandering amid Manichaean delusions, the other teaching salvation most soundly. But salvation is far from sinners, such as I then stood before him, and yet was I drawing nearer by little and little, and unconsciously. For though I took no pains to learn what he spake, but only to hear how he spake, for that empty care alone was left me, despairing of a way, open for man to thee, yet together with the words which I would choose, came also into my mind the things which I would refuse, for I could not separate them. And while I opened my heart to admit how eloquently he spake, there also entered how truly he spake. But this by degrees. For first, these things also had now begun to appear to me capable of defence, and the Catholic faith, for which I had thought nothing could be said against the Manichees' objections, I now thought might be maintained without shamelessness, especially after I had heard one or two places of the Old Testament resolved, and oft times in a figure, which when I understood literally, I was slain spiritually. Very many places then of those books having been explained, I now blamed my despair in believing that no answer could be given to such as hated and scoffed at the law and the prophets. Yet did I not therefore then see that the Catholic way was to be held, because it also could find learned maintainers, who could at large, and with some show of reason, answer objections, nor that what I held was therefore to be condemned, because both sides could be maintained. For the Catholic cause seemed to me in such sort not vanquished, as still not as yet to be victorious. Hereupon I earnestly bent my mind, to see if in any way I could by any certain proof convict the Manichees of falsehood. Could I once have conceived a spiritual substance, all their strongholds had been beaten down and cast utterly out of my mind. But I could not. Notwithstanding, concerning the frame of this world, and the whole of nature, which the senses of the flesh can reach to, as I more and more considered and compared things, I judged the tenets of most of the philosophers to have been much more probable. So then, after the manner of the academics, as they are supposed, doubting of everything, and wavering between all, I settled so far that the Manichees were to be abandoned, judging that, even while doubting, I might not continue in that sect, to which I already preferred some of the philosophers, to which philosophers notwithstanding, for that they were without the saving name of Christ, I utterly refused to commit the cure of my sick soul. I determined, therefore, so long to be a catechumen in the Catholic Church, to which I had been commended by my parents, till something certain should dawn upon me, whither I might steer my course.